Hello friends. Tonight we'll step into a place where agarwood isn't used for relaxation. This isn't a fairy tale of royal courts. It's a journey of rot, decay, and suffocating silence surrounding a queen who once brought an entire kingdom to its knees. And if you think power comes with glory, try living next to Anne Boleyn for a day to learn that death sometimes wears red lipstick and smiles. Before you lean back comfortably, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I share, and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. It's fascinating to see people tuning in from all over the world. Now, turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some background noise, and let's dive into tonight's journey together. Imagine arriving at a place reeking of rotting flesh mixed with agarwood, not a morgue, not hell, but the private chambers of Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, whose very breath could make even priests cross themselves. This morning you were weeding the backyard when a man in a green velvet coat, wearing an amber ring, pointed at you and said one sentence, "That face suits silence." 2 hours later, you're standing in Hampton Court, clutching a scented cloth, stomach growling, head spinning from the agarwood fumes, rising from the sweat-stained stone floor. They didn't bring you to clean chamber pots. No, you've been appointed as Anne Boleyn's new personal attendant, the woman who split the Catholic Church in two with a single wink. It sounds like you'll serve a glamorous, pristine queen, anointed with French perfume, sleeping on Italian silk, speaking in an angelic voice. But then her chamber door opens, and in that moment, not light, not greetings, but the smell hits you. The damp odor of a 1,000-year-old castle, untouched by sunlight. The heavy scent of agarwood, as if hiding something. And the final smell, a sharp, sickly sweet, hollow stench, like someone died here and chose not to leave. It slaps you in the face like an unannounced blow. You freeze, heart racing. Your eyes sting, but those behind you only nod for you to step forward. And you understand, retreating now means signing your own death warrant. No one told you power could rot. No one warned you that the highest place in the palace is also the foulest. You thought the worst would be wiping the queen's feet. But no, the worst is living close enough to smell, and now you're inside. Congratulations. Every breath you take from now on will remind you that the true scent of royalty isn't flowers, but corpses. And if you think it's just an initial shock, that you'll get used to it, that things will become more bearable as you adjust to the royal routine, you're wrong. Because the one thing the royal court lacks is a hygiene routine. On your first day, you're assigned the most intimate task among the servants, changing the queen's undergarments in the morning and her outer dress in the evening. Between those changes, there's no bathing, no wiping down. Not a single drop of water touches her body, unless it's the tears of those kneeling before her. You vividly recall the first moment you were handed a new dress, velvet so heavy you had to brace your arms to keep it from dragging on the floor, and the supervisor whispered, "Don't wash your hands before dressing her." You thought she was in a rush. You thought it was an exception. You thought you'd sneakily wash your hands behind their backs with a small jug of water in the corner. But then you realized there are no jugs. No one washes their hands. No one washes anything, because water is the enemy. To Anne, water doesn't cleanse. It's a carrier of disease, something that makes women fall ill and birth demons. During your first conversation with her, really a monologue while you knelt, fastening her corset, she told you about a lady-in-waiting who sneezed while bathing in spring and died 7 days later. She looked at you, eyes deep as hollows in a sunless forest, and said, "Water steals a woman's purity," and she never bathed. Instead, you're taught the ritual of refreshing the queen. It involves sprinkling agarwood powder on her hair, wiping her wrists with rose vinegar-soaked cloth, and using rice powder mixed with herbs to cover darkened, peeling, or discolored skin. She calls it dry bathing. To you, it's painting a human form onto a corpse not yet fully decomposed. The skin beneath that pale makeup sometimes cracks, oozing blood. Sometimes you wipe actual blood. Sometimes you're not sure if it's blood or pus. And you haven't washed your hands since entering the room. You're not allowed to show disgust. You can't flinch when touching the rough skin under her chin. You can't shudder when the ammonia stench from her armpits escapes as she raises her arm to brush her hair. Your job isn't to be a servant. You're part of the disguise, a living cloth, able to smile, nod, and numb your sense of smell by biting your tongue until it bleeds. She doesn't bathe, but she changes into over a dozen dresses, each worn once then hung up, unwashed, unfolded, just draped like a mummy. Some dresses she wears when her belly swells, meaning her period. You know exactly which ones are stained with blood. You still have to hand them to her if she asks. And when she tosses them aside, you're the one folding them, with bare hands. You once quietly asked a kitchen servant why no one says anything about this. They laughed, a dry, cracked laugh, and said, "Why question the smell of the sun? She's a goddess, and gods don't need to bathe." You're not sure if it was sarcasm or a warning, but it was enough to stop you from asking again. One rainy day, with slippery corridors and guards falling flat, Anne refused to leave her room because of the wet wind. You brought her tea, hands wet from cleaning water off the rug's edge. She looked at you like you were a rotting corpse, then signaled you to step back 3 paces. From then on, you learned to dry everything before entering her sight. The horror isn't that she doesn't bathe, it's that the entire court pretends she just did. Everyone is an actor in an endless performance, where the most fragrant woman in England is the one who hasn't touched soap in years, and you, with unwashed hands, are the one touching the outermost layer of that myth. You're the boundary between decay and glory, and you can't let anyone discover the truth, because if they find out you see, you smell, you know, you'll vanish like the servant before you. No one needs a witness, they just need a wiper, and wipers don't need clean hands. The next morning, you're summoned before dawn. A guard leads you to her room. They've left a new dress on a chair, and when you touch the heavy fabric, still warm with her body's scent from yesterday, you no longer feel disgust. Only one thought echoes: I still haven't washed my hands. But you button it, you cinch the waist, you smooth the collar, you breathe lightly, and you smile, as if everything is clean. But you know nothing is clean here. And then comes the day Anne Boleyn decides to bathe. No one warned you, no signs, just a gloomy morning, wind slamming the windows like someone wailing outside, when she suddenly declares, "Bring the tub." You don't understand. The older servants glance at each other, their faces pale, as if hearing a call from the morgue. One whispers to you, "Good luck." You still don't get it, until you see it. The Queen's bath, grandly called the purification basin, is actually an old wooden tub, waist-high, rimmed with rusted iron bands, its warped, cracked planks like the teeth of the dead. The first smell isn't perfume, not rose oil, but the rancid stench of raw meat left in the sun, a mix of dried blood, stagnant water, hidden mold, and something you dare not name. You whisper, "Is this really used?" The woman beside you only says, "The last time she used it was a year ago. The water hasn't been changed since." You think you misheard, until you lean over and look inside. The water is reddish-brown, thick, unmoving, unless stirred. A thin film coats the surface, glossy and still like a stagnant pond. The smell from the tub is a denser, raw, more concentrated version of the odor you breathe daily in her room. She calls it old water with a soul. In truth, it's water holding menstrual blood, agarwood oil, dead herbs, hand-wash water from her ladies, and perhaps parts of a former servant. You're assigned to stir the water with a wooden shovel, no gloves. Each stir forces you to breathe deeply and pray your nose is already dead. As you work, Anne enters, supported by 2 maids, head wrapped in a cloth, hair uncombed, barefoot, and as she approaches the tub, no one is allowed to look. Everyone bows their heads, except you, stirring. You're the only one witnessing the scene. She disrobes. With each movement, white powder falls from her skin like chalk dust, revealing blotchy patches beneath. She steps into the water, as if entering an ancient ritual. No one speaks, no one breathes loudly. And then she sits. Water surges, spilling over, soaking the floor. You stand frozen. Something floats out of the tub, a piece of cloth, or old skin. You're not sure. Your eyes burn. The smell is so thick, it clings to your hair. But no one says anything. They just stand, waiting. 5 minutes, 10, 15. No one moves. No one dares leave while she's bathing. After 17 minutes, she stands. No wiping down, no fresh towel. just a new dress pulled over her drenched body. Then she leaves, as if stepping out of a fairy spring. You're left with the tub. You have to clean it. No brush, no soap, just your hands, a burlap cloth, and a dented tin scoop. You start at the bottom, where you find a thick, black sediment, tar-like, smelling like a stable, with a hint of human. You scrub, but the more you scrub, the hotter your hands feel. You think it's the water, but when you rinse your hands, you realize they're blistered, slightly burned, maybe from the oils, or something fermented in the water. You can't speak, you can't tell anyone. After drying the tub and covering it with linen, the supervisor tells you, if anyone asks, say the Queen bathed in holy water. You nod, but you know, it's not water. It's the most vivid proof of the twisted faith this entire court kneels before. That night, back in your room, the smell lingers on your hands, no matter how hard you scrub, until your skin tears, no matter how you soak them in wine, ash, or vinegar. The smell won't leave. It's in your skin. It's under your nails. You sleep, dreaming you're soaking in that tub. You see your eyes dissolve in the water. You see other servants floating beside you. The next morning, you wake to a call. The tub needs drying. Hurry. You open your eyes, hands still red and raw, but you don't resist. You get up, because now you understand, once you've touched that tub, you're no longer ordinary. You're part of it. And it, like a living creature, will demand you return, repeat, serve. You once thought the Queen's bath would be England's most luxurious place, but it's a tomb with a lid of human skin, and you, the tomb wiper, unpaid, unnamed, scentless. Only one thought echoes every time you're near it. If this is purification, then hell is her sauna, and you, having survived that horrific liquid, still haven't finished your role, because bathing, or what they call bathing, is just the beginning. Next, you'll touch the most sacred, complex, and parasite-ridden part of the Queen's body, her hair. Anne Boleyn's hair was once praised in poetry. Black as night, smooth as the Thames at sunset, a French noble once wrote, but that was from 3 meters away, under candlelight, by someone who never held a comb. You don't have that luxury. You're responsible for brushing her radiance. In the morning, after she soaks in that reddish-brown tub, her hair is unbound, cascading down her back. Each time, you can't help but imagine standing behind a rotting wooden statue, covered in glossy black moss, because there's a faint shimmer from the scented oil applied to her hair. But that shimmer doesn't fool your nose. Beneath the oil is a persistent smoldering smell, like incense powder, mixed with old sweat and animal excretions. More specifically, lice. You're given a bone comb, 3 sharp pins to pluck quickly if needed, and a black velvet cloth to lay on the floor to maintain hygiene and the Queen's honor. Honor, meaning the lice fall on the cloth, unseen. You lean close to her neck, where the hair is pressed tight, damp, and darkest, and there you see them. Small patches of skin, flaking like peeling wall plaster. Beneath, a red, inflamed area, sometimes crusted with dried blood. Lice move lazily, as if at home in this terrain. Some are dead, stuck to her scalp. Others are alive, swollen, glossy, engorged with blood. You must comb gently enough not to hurt her, firmly enough to dislodge what you dare not name. And during this, you must talk. Your Majesty, your hair is so soft today. The light makes it even more enchanting. No, Your Majesty, today's scented oil makes me feel like I'm in a May garden. You lie as smoothly as a guard, swearing loyalty. Each compliment dodges a louse falling onto your collar. One crawls across the back of your hand. You grit your teeth, smile, and continue. If you stop, if you show fear, if you step back, you'll be replaced, like the servant before you, who cried after being bitten behind the ear and vanished from the palace by morning. Her hair is long, thick, and dry at the ends, like half-burnt straw. Each comb catches on tangles, and you must untangle them, with your hands, pins, or teeth, if there's no other way. Once, you pulled too hard. She turned, eyes cold as blades, and said, "Next time, remember my hair isn't a kitchen maid's." You nod, your heart tightens, and you don't stop, because you know each strand here is a noose. Pull the wrong one, and it could strangle you. Some mornings, her hair falls out heavily, You're ordered to gather it, wrap it in silk, seal it, unseen by anyone. They say a woman's hair is her soul. If so, you're holding Anne Boleyn's soul daily, and it's rotting. You've seen lice crawl up your sleeve, down your wrist, even once, inside your undergarments. You wanted to scream but remembered the warning. Stay silent, even if burned alive, and you stay silent. You let it crawl, you wait, you endure, because that's part of the job, the part no one mentions in court rituals. One afternoon, after brushing, as you pick up fallen hair, Anne asks, "Are you jealous of my hair?" You look at the hair, now braided high, adorned with jeweled pins. It's beautiful, from a distance. But you remember the smell of dried blood, flaking skin, and the lice colony. You smile, bow. "Your Majesty, I admire it too much to be jealous." She laughs, a real laugh. And in that laugh, you sense something like pity. That night, washing your own hair with water boiled to nothing, you scratch your neck and feel a small lump. You smell your hand. The odor lingers. The image of crawling lice stays in your mind. You start to understand why people go mad, why they talk to themselves, why the former servant never left her bed after leaving the palace. The next day, you brush her hair again. You lean in, smile, compliment, because it's the only way to survive. To keep pretending you're helping a graceful queen brush her glossy hair, while really facing a nest of parasites, accustomed to living in power. You pull, and you tell yourself, over and over, like a mantra, hair is a woman's crown, and lice are its most loyal subjects. You repeat that mantra every morning, like a talisman to get through a brushing session without vomiting on your apron. But hair is just the first layer. Beneath that crown lies a living body, or rather, a body slowly decomposing, wrapped in velvet, sequins, lace, and perfume. You're assigned a new task, preparing the queen's undergarments. It sounds simple, just fabric, you think. An inner layer of her outer dress, just fold it neatly, scent it, bring it when she changes, until you open the chest containing her undergarments. The moment the lid lifts, a wave of stench hits you like opening a rat cage left in the sun. Not ordinary sweat, not old clothes, but a moldy, meaty rot, the smell you remember from an 8-year-old memory of a bloated dead cat in a village ditch. Except this dead cat doesn't wear embroidered silk. Here the stench is sealed in hand-stitched Italian silk, gold-trimmed. You nearly gasp, but remember the first warning, never grimace. An older servant approaches, not looking at you, just handing you a tiny glass vial with a wick stopper, saying, "Spray the innermost lining. Don't overdo it. And remember, only the inside." You learn gradually. Each undergarment is sprayed with a little scent, usually jasmine, sometimes musk, occasionally expensive sandalwood oil, on the part closest to her chest or stomach, not to smell nice, but to cover, to hide the stench rising from inflamed skin, from sweat glands never washed, from a body wrapped in 3 layers of dresses for weeks, from menstrual blood seeping into unwashed fabric, and sometimes from dead rats trapped in the chest, their odor absorbed into the cloth. Absurd, but once, you found a dried rat tail stuck to the hem of an undergarment. You only saw it while folding the 5th layer. No one was surprised. No one reacted. They just said, "Probably another one got in during winter." That's it. No one called the guards. No one disinfected. Just you, forced to keep spraying perfume on the garment you just pulled a corpse fragment from. You wonder, why not wash? Why not replace? Why does the kingdom's ruler wear things even market peasants would reject? And you get an answer from an older servant's fleeting glance. Every time it's washed, it needs explaining, and she never likes explaining. So, everyone's complicit. Together, they embalm a living corpse. Together, they spray fragrance on decay. Together, they keep the secret that the palace's most fragrant place is its most rotten. You develop a skill, spraying evenly, enough, but not overpowering, because if it's too strong, she'll ask, "Why so much?" And if you hesitate, you won't be assigned again. Each time she dresses, she often asks, "Do I smell nice?" You bow, hands still fastening buttons, replying as taught, like spring skies after the first rain, "Your Majesty." Though your mind recalls rotting meat, though your skin itches from brushing a damp spot under the armpit. Once, you boldly tried a new scent, citrus oil. You thought it would mask better, but she sniffed, glanced at you, and asked, "Do you want me to smell like a fruit peddler?" And you understood, here, perfume isn't for cleansing, it's a ritual, a veil, makeup for a cracking wall. No one wants a new scent. They just want to pretend there's no smell at all. The worst is summer, the air heavy with sweat, spoiled food, uncleared hallway trash, dried horse dung in the courtyard, and still, Anne Boleyn's room stands out. You once saw a new guard vomit at the door, thinking he was near a corpse kitchen. That guard was never called back, but you learned to stand deeper, breathe through your mouth, and spray skillfully. One day, you stop smelling anything. Your nose seems burned out inside. You realize you've lived too long in the stench. You brush hair, change dresses, spray undergarments, feeling nothing. It's not endurance, it's adaptation, transformation. You've become part of the ritual, part of the scent. And the worst part, you start feeling empty without that smell. You can't sleep without a whiff of jasmine, mixed with moldy rot. You don't feel safe if her dress is too fragrant, too new, too strange. You fear what's clean, because here, cleanliness signals death or replacement. One evening, preparing her nightgown, you accidentally spill perfume on your hand. The scent soaks into your skin. You think she'll be furious, but no, she inhales deeply, then whispers, "You know I once spilled it like that too," and she falls silent for a long time. As you turn away, you hear, "Back then, I could still smell the real scent. Now I can't." You don't dare ask more, but from that day you understand. Maybe she no longer smells herself either. Maybe she's just trying to live in the fragrance others create for her. Maybe all she holds onto is the illusion of a once fragrant body, now just an echo of a dead rat's stench under her silk skirts. And you, the scent sprayer, keep that illusion alive. You no longer know what you're hiding. Only that, each time you uncork the jasmine vial, a part of you escapes with the fragrance, leaving a nameless servant, standing amid rotting meat, hands trembling, but mouth still saying, like spring skies, "How many times this month have you said that sentence?" You don't remember. Maybe 50, maybe more. You say it like a reflex, like the crow of a chicken with its neck wrung, trying to cry out one last thing before falling silent forever. But here, no one dies immediately. They just rot slowly, layer by layer, like the deep crimson velvet dress you're spreading on the bed, where a dark bloodstain has sunk into the fabric, like a secret punishment. You once thought a queen would never bleed. You thought a body as powerful as hers had transcended mundane physical constraints, that she only wept in perfume and breathed in holy words. But then one day, helping her change after a banquet, you saw it, a small, unmistakable curved bloodstain seeping into the inner lining of her velvet dress, darkened like an accidental stroke of human blood. You froze for half a second, just half a second, but she turned her head, her gaze sharp as an old razor.
"What's that?"
You swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the floor. "Nothing, Your Majesty, just a fold." She didn't ask further, and you, hands still trembling, kept folding the dress, avoiding the dried, damp patch. No sanitary cloths, no absorbent rags, no paper, just a few layers of lining fabric, sometimes squares of wool, folded thickly, secured with a waist tie. Those weren't washed often either, because washing too much ruins a woman's shape. That's what an old servant whispered when she caught you sneaking blood-stained cloth to wash. From then on, you learned to treat blood like it was holy water. No grimacing, no saying dirty, no staring too long. If blood stained the dress's hem, you'd turn that part inward while folding. If it had dried into a hard streak, you'd lightly spray perfume on it, then pretend to smell roses. It's all ritual, a ritual to keep the myth of Anne Boleyn free from menstruation. You learned that, in this palace, menstruation isn't a biological function, it's an omen, a reminder that this woman, who made a king divorce his wife, split a church and upend Europe, is still just a body that bleeds monthly. A truth too dangerous to acknowledge. You heard once that during a chapel service, a red bloodstain appeared on a noble woman's dress. 3 days later, she vanished from court. No one said she died, but you saw her belongings burned, like they would a diseased animal's carcass. Here, blood must not spill. unless it's on the executioner's block. When it's her time, Anne wears special dresses. You recognize them not by their design, but by their smell, the smell of iron, of dryness, of a body desperately hiding the most natural thing in the world. You're ordered to change her dress faster. No questions, no looking, no heavy breathing. Once, kneeling to remove her dress, you saw drops fall onto the tiles. You moved to wipe them. She looked at you. "No need," she said. "Leave it. Blood reminds us we're alive." You don't know if that's pride or madness, but from that day, you wiped blood like you wiped dust. Gently, no trace, no comment, asking only to survive another day. Sometimes, the blood soaks the dress too deeply to hide. Dark purple stains form on the innermost layer, branching like tree roots or river maps. You once touched such a stain, still damp. You told yourself, "This is a queen's blood. Don't be disgusted." But your palm went cold. That night, you couldn't sleep. Your eyes kept replaying the bloodstain on red velvet, a truth so raw it was cruel. She's no goddess. She's human, a human who bleeds. But the palace doesn't let you remember that. No one can mention it. No one can speak. Each morning, you fasten her dress like dressing a sacred statue. Each night, you fold her gowns like shrouds for a living saint. And if your hands get bloodied, you wipe them on your apron, smile, and walk away, as if the blood never existed. Once, while hanging a dress, a young new maid whispered, "It smells kind of metallic." You turned and stared, for a long time, and she understood. She never asked again, never opened her mouth, and you keep working, folding, wiping, flipping dresses, airing fabrics, spraying perfume. No questions, no thoughts, only your eyes, growing dimmer each day, emptier each time you see blood, until you feel nothing. Just a habit. When you see blood, stay silent, as if words would make that blood real. And the truth, in this place, is the one thing no one can smell, touch, or speak aloud. Because here, the truth isn't just dangerous, it can kill you. You learned this best one autumn morning, kneeling before the Queen's dressing mirror. She'd just returned from the chapel, her face cold as wax, and you were fastening a pearl necklace around her neck. A simple task, if the stench from her body wasn't so overpowering you nearly gagged. A horrific mix of old powder, sweat-soaked back, unwashed menstrual blood, and a layer of perfume over it all. For one fleeting second, you grimaced, not because you're weak, but because you're human. Just one grimace. No one shouted, no one slammed a table. Just a cold, slow glance, sliding from the mirror to your face. Then her voice, soft as old velvet, but sharp as wire. "What were you just thinking?" You panicked, bowed quickly. "Nothing, Your Majesty. Just the light." "The light? Yes. It hit my eyes." She said nothing more. She turned away, but you felt cold sweat run down your spine. 3 days later, guards woke you at midnight. No explanation. They bound your hands, dragged you from bed, through 3 cold stone corridors, to a small room. No windows, no light, no smell but mold and rusted iron. The dungeon under the West Tower. You weren't tortured, weren't beaten, just locked there for 2 nights. No water, no food, no sound, except the breathing of other prisoners, or maybe your own, echoing off the stone. No explanation given, no reason mentioned, but you knew exactly. It was all for one grimace, one moment of showing you still had reflexes, emotions, and that, in this palace, is treason. After that, you trained your face like a martial art. Every muscle a soldier. Eyebrows don't droop, lips don't purse, eyes don't squint, even if lice crawl on your eyelids, even if you touch old blood, even if the smell under her dress stings your eyes. You smile, gently, not too much, not too real, a calibrated smile, so no one sees your pain. The palace isn't a place for truth. Everyone here is a mask, every servant a silent actor. You don't flinch when a dead rat falls from the ceiling onto a dining tray. You don't step back when you smell gangrene on the Queen's foot. You don't widen your eyes when she orders herbs stuffed into her dress to ward off evil. You bow, nod, smile, do, and stay silent. You realize the best here aren't the fastest or smartest. They're the ones who go numb quickest. A new maid, Isolde, was diligent, but the first time she saw Anne's foot bleed while changing shoes, she stepped back, covered her mouth. 4 days later, Isolde was sent to the kitchens. You know what that means. The kitchens are just another name for endless exile. In contrast, the veteran servant, old Marjorie, hunched, half-blind, fingers swollen with eczema, stays because she never reacts. Even when her hands blistered from touching lead-mixed powder, she applied it evenly. Even when her eyes reddened from wiping Anne's armpits on the hottest day, she sang lullabies. You start copying her. You practice in the mirror when no one's looking. Standing for hours, imagining blood smeared on you, lice crawling, the smell of dead rats, and keeping your face blank. You learn to smell with memory, picturing your mother's apple pie while the Queen's foot odor clings to your fingers. And you succeed. One day, Anne sneezes, spraying bloody phlegm onto your dress. You don't move. She looks at you, smiles faintly. You've got stronger nerves than I thought. That day, you're rewarded with a jam pastry. You eat it with hands still stained with blood and phlegm, unwashed, unwiped, but you eat, and you feel like you're winning. From then on, every day is a performance. Every move, breath, glance, controlled like a musician playing under a gun. You're no longer human. You're a replica, a being that bows, nods, praises Jasmine amid rotting flesh, until one day, watching an old maid, whipped for sneezing during Anne's meditation, you realize you feel nothing. You watch her dragged away, blood dripping on the corridor, and your eyes are empty. Your heart doesn't race. Your hands don't tremble. You only wonder, will I be dragged off if I stare longer than 3 seconds? And then you know, the dungeon isn't below the palace. It's the invisible thing inside you, strangling every emotion, reflex, humanity. You're imprisoned from within, but you still smile, still bow, still fold blood-stained dresses, because here, breathing is allowed, grimacing is not. Each day you grow better at living as a mask that wipes dried blood, sprays jasmine on moldy undergarments, pretends not to see lice crawling up dress hems. But one thing you never get used to, despite repeating it hundreds of times, the smell of Anne Boleyn's breath when you lean in to apply her lipstick. You're the only one allowed to touch the Queen's lips before major appearances. Not maids, not nobles, not nurses. You, because your hands are small, quick, steady, and most importantly, you've proven you never react, even when her breath is strong enough to wilt the room's flowers. The first time you were ordered to apply her lipstick, you thought you'd use something fine, red pigment from crushed rose petals, beeswax mixed with honey. But no, the lipstick you're given is a chunk of lead-based vermilion wax, toxic, crumbly, with a metallic taste like blood. The foundation? A thick mix of rice powder, sulfur, and a little oil, like mud, smelling of old lard. But she makes you layer it on her lips, press wax onto her front teeth for a soft yet firm smile. The problem is, her teeth are no longer original. You don't know exactly how many she's lost. Maybe 6, maybe more. But you know that every time she opens her mouth, you see dark gaps, speckled yellow-white, and a smell that convinces you hell isn't hot, it's putrid. Once, while pressing wax to her front teeth to hide a gap, you saw the wax stick to a loose tooth. When you gently pulled it away, the tooth came with it. You didn't scream, didn't flinch, just hid it in your sleeve, rinsed it with wine later. She didn't notice, or noticed, but didn't speak, just smirked at the mirror. And flower here means lips you shape into a heart deep red as blood, with powder dabbed at the corners to hide cracked skin, and crushed pearl dust on her chin to conceal a festering mole. Tug wax on her teeth isn't just to hide gaps, but to mold her lips like a frame for a wax statue's mouth. You must do it all quickly, smoothly, without a trace. You once dropped a piece of wax just before a banquet. As you bent to pick it up, she said, "If that doesn't make it to my mouth in time, you'll be the one eating it." You smiled, picked it up, applied it, and prayed it wouldn't fall when she laughed with the king. Anne knows her teeth are ruined. She once said, "A woman who smiles showing teeth is cheap, but smiling without teeth loses the throne." You understand, her smile is a weapon, a declaration that she's still here, despite cavities, bleeding gums, breath reeking of old blood and hair dye. She smiles, and you, behind that smile, must make it look real. Once, you applied the lipstick slightly off, edging left. When she looked in the mirror, she paused for 3 seconds, then turned to you, asking, "Do I look crooked to you?" You stood straight, met her eyes, and said, "Your Majesty, crooked is the new trend of the heavens." She laughed. The first time you saw her laugh, genuinely, unrestrained, unguarded, and the last time you were allowed to apply it off-center. You learned that under the lipstick, her mouth is cracked, oozing slow blood, lips so dry, you sometimes use wine to wipe off dead skin before reapplying. The wine makes her wince. But if you don't do it, the lipstick won't stick, and if it doesn't stick, the smile won't hold. And if the smile doesn't hold, the king will look elsewhere. All of it. Broken combs, fallen teeth, applied wax, bloody breath, is the backstage of a glorious image. The kingdom celebrates. In the portrait, hung in the great hall, Anne smiles gently, lips rose red, teeth perfectly white. You once stood before that painting, recalling how you'd used tweezers to remove pus from her gums the previous morning, and felt choked, not from disgust, but from knowing you're the only one who knows the truth. To create a smile like in the painting takes 3 layers of lipstick, 2 layers of wax, a brave servant, and a mouth rotting from within. But you can't speak, can't remember, only continue. Hold the lipstick, apply the wax, wipe the blood, and smile when she asks, "How do I look?" You bow, voice firm as a nail in a coffin lid, like you've never known pain. That's the most beautiful lie you've ever spoken, and the lie this entire court upholds together. Because if they admit Anne Boleyn feels pain, that her smile is built from pus, blood, and the stench of dye, then the throne she sits on would start to crack. Everything around you is a taut web of things that must not be true, and none is more absurd than her fear of water. You thought it was a joke, a metaphor, that she hated cold rain or disliked stone tubs, but no, she truly fears water, fears it like fire, like death. She doesn't touch wash basins, doesn't step barefoot on damp stone, never crosses a hallway being mopped, and you, living an arm's length from her, are tasked with handling everything wet in her place. Your job from early morning is to fetch water from the well behind the servants' quarters. This water is for washing her face, hands, and sensitive areas, but you're the one touching it, not her. You carry buckets with bare hands, washcloths with hands peeling from lye, pour water on stone floors, wring rags, scrub yellow stains from bodily fluids left on bedsheets, and you can't wear gloves, because gloves reduce reverence. They say Anne once saw a relative die after drinking rainwater from a roof. Since then, she believed water carries disease, not air, not germs, but water. Water makes hair fall. Water ulcerates skin. Water makes women infertile. All things she fears more than death. So, if her body must be cleaned, she chooses. You soak cloths in diluted perfume, wring them dry, then wipe her sensitive areas, neck, armpits, nape, lower belly. For her private parts, you kneel low, holding the cloth like a sacred relic. No slipping, no dripping. A wrong drop means a slap or banishment from the room. Once you saw, clearly, a bruised purple lump under her dress. You offered to call a physician. She just shook her head. That's from March rainwater. Scrub harder, and you scrubbed, gently, no resistance, no words. The longer you live in the palace, the more you understand. Water, to her, is a symbol of loss of control, a free-flowing, unpredictable current, like menstrual blood, like tears, like the amniotic fluid she couldn't hold during a failed pregnancy. Her fear isn't of water, but of anything leaving her body beyond her control. So, she rejects it all. No crying, no bleeding, no bathing, no hand-washing. Every flow is handed to you. That's why you're the one mopping the floor after she urinates, by hand, with old silk cloths, dipped in white wine or thyme oil. One day, she had stomach pain, and waste stained the bed. The night servant fled.
You were cold.
When you entered, she sat upright, face cold as stone. No apology, just a glance signaling, clean, and you cleaned. Every patch, every streak, mouth covered with your sleeve, wiping with warm water, then spraying jasmine into the air like a prayer. No one talks about what you do. You're not allowed to mention it, even to yourself, but your body speaks for you. Your skin thickens, your nails darken, your eyes are red from sleeplessness, and harsh oils. But you keep going, because you're the only one loyal enough to clean what the queen can't accept as part of herself. One day, while scrubbing the floor, a nobleman walked in by mistake. He saw you kneeling, wiping dried urine by the bed's foot, hands bare, hair disheveled, sweat dripping. He chuckled softly, then left. You weren't angry, weren't ashamed. You just felt empty. You're cleaning what the entire palace refuses to acknowledge exists. And you do it. Every day. Nameless. Unpraised. Unseen. So, you two learn to fear water. Not because it's dirty, but because every time you see water, you know you're about to clean something others won't face. Water, however clear, in this palace always carries the shadow of guilt, failure, and the instinct's power tries to bury under white lace and scented powder. Once you dreamed of being held underwater, filled with menstrual blood, forced to drink. When you woke, you weren't exactly afraid, just resentful. Because even in dreams, you couldn't escape the smell. Still the wiper, still the para. That morning, carrying a bucket of water into her room, Anne looked at you, smiled faintly. When you hold water, you look like the Grim Reaper, but death has cleaner hands. You smiled back and stepped forward, hands still bare, water still steaming. You no longer know what you're wiping, only that, if anyone can wash the unspeakable things in this world, it's you, the one who touches water, so others can live in the illusion they're never wet. You keep royalty from leaking onto the floor, but water is only part of the truth. The rest is air, or rather, its absence. Anne Boleyn's room is a sealed stone crypt, no windows, no vents, no natural light, only candles, braziers, and velvet curtains, thick as shrouds hanging from ceiling to floor. You enter at dawn and don't know what day it is until you leave. The light never changes, nor does the smell. You live 12 hours a day in a space thick with the stench of lead, urine fermented in ceramic pots, agarwood smoldering day and night, and a woman slowly decomposing, but wrapped in gold lace and scented powder. Even when Anne isn't there, the room holds her smell, as if the stones, rugs, wooden cabinets, and mirrors have absorbed her into every fiber. Once, you tried parting the curtains for a bit of light. Immediately, an old maid yanked your hand, hissing, "Do you want her to fall ill?" They believe sunlight ruins skin, causes sores, boils blood, and spawns nightmares. Anne never lets natural light touch her face. All light in her room is filtered, candles behind screens, oil lamps behind veiled mirrors. Her light is fumed cereal, yellowed, dim, not illuminating, just flickering. The air is always thick, so thick you feel you could chew it. You once opened your mouth to breathe, dizzy, and felt like inhaling a vinegar-soaked cotton cloth mixed with incense, sour, pungent, suffocating, making your lungs contract. But you can't open the door, can't complain, can't show you're gasping for air. Because if you collapse, they'll say you're weak. Not that the Queen's room is a sealed coffin. You learn to ration your breath. Inhale lightly, exhale evenly, move minimally. You trim your nails, fold dresses, wipe her feet, change bedsheets, all in stifling darkness. Every action tests your ability to work with a brain starved of oxygen. Once, a new servant fainted after cleaning the hearth. Her nose bled. They carried her out, blamed low calcium, and replaced her. No one checked the hearth. No one opened the curtains. You stood there, staring at the blood on the rug, still not fully cleaned after weeks, and kept wiping Anne's feet. To mask the stench, they burn agarwood, 1 block daily. Fist-sized, smoldering on a silver dish under the dressing table. It blends with human odor, mold, hair oil, creating a scent so distinct you think, blindfold me, take me anywhere, and with this smell, I'd know I'm in Anne Boleyn's domain. That smell clings to your hair, your clothes, your lips when you breathe through your mouth. Some days you feel you no longer exist independently. You're an extension of that room, a creature made of agarwood fumes, lead powder, and stale air. The room isn't cleaned as you imagined.
Stu.
You thought a queen would live in pristine silk, everything scrubbed to a shine, but no. Dust under the bed is thick enough to write your name with a finger. A blackened rat corpse lies neatly between 2 candle stands under the table. A tangled hair clump, stuck to the mirror's corner from 3 months ago, is still there, because nothing can be moved without orders. not trash, not carcasses. Once, while scrubbing the floor, you dropped a comb. It slid under the curtain. Lifting it, you saw a large insect, maybe a cockroach or something worse, crawling around a grey circular stain, the remnant of something spilled and never cleaned. You quickly grabbed the comb, pulled the curtain back. No one could see. No one could know. Anne entered then. She sat, asked softly, "Is there wind?" You bowed.
No.
"Your Majesty." Nothing got in. She nodded, closed her eyes, smiled, as if the absence of wind was a victory. And you realized in that suffocating space, she feels safe, because everything is still. No wind, no sound, no changing light, no moving life. The room is a frozen world, where time doesn't flow, decay hides under lace, and you, the only awake servant, become a living air filter, straining to breathe what others refuse. Each time you leave after 12 hours, stepping into the breezy corridor, light hitting your eyes, you collapse onto a bench, not from exhaustion, but because you just remembered, all day, you forgot to breathe. Not because you don't want to, but because Anne Boleyn's room has taught you a rule. You can only breathe if no one notices. From the way you move, scrub the floor, spray perfume, to the way you hold your breath while changing her linings. Everything is a silent dance, choreographed, to avoid disturbing the rotting air of the palace. And then, one day, that dance is interrupted by something small, a simple task, tending to her feet. That day, Anne didn't go out. She lay on a chaise, dress draped loosely, eyes half closed, speaking as if sleepwalking. "Call the heel scrubber." You hesitated. As her primary attendant, you'd never been trained for this. Taking someone's place was serious, especially for touching the Queen's feet. But the servant assigned to this task, Ellen, had vanished 3 days ago. No one said anything. No one asked. They just said she was reassigned. Reassigned where no one knew. So you prepared everything yourself. Clean cloth, warm water basin, pumice stone. Lifting the porcelain basin from the shelf, you saw the water inside was old, murky like beef washing water left overnight. It had a film. It smelled like rancid blood. You froze, about to pour it out for fresh water, when you saw it. A small piece, no bigger than a fingertip, cloudy white, with dark brown edges, soft, slick, and clearly human skin. You scooped it up with your fingertip, cold, thin, like a layer of epidermis peeled off a foot. You weren't sure what it was, but instinct told you Ellen hadn't left this room intact. Maybe an accident, maybe a punishment, maybe a warning. You didn't have time to think further. A voice came from behind. "What's that?" You startled, turned. Anne was staring, eyes narrowed, lips pursed. You froze for a second, then dropped the skin back into the water, answering, "Just an old piece of cloth, Your Majesty. Throw it out. Get fresh water. I don't like slimy things under my feet." You obeyed, but from then on, every time you trimmed her toenails, your hands trembled slightly, though you'd trained yourself to apply lipstick without smudging in the dark, because Anne's toenails weren't like normal ones. They were thick, twisted, rough, like the claws of an animal, caged too long in stone. The skin on her heels was calloused, cracked, grey, smelling like damp cement. Some areas had scabs. Each time you scrubbed with the pumice stone, you heard a grating sound like grinding bone. But the danger wasn't the smell, the blood, or the scabs. It was the unpredictability. You never knew how she'd react. Once, you accidentally made her wince by pulling her pinky toe too hard. She stayed silent. You thought it was fine, but that night, you were summoned to the steward's room and whipped 5 times for hurting the sacred. No one said it outright. No one recorded it. But you knew. It all started with one wince, like Ellen's. They whispered that Ellen, during one slip, scratched Anne's heel. A small cut, but it bled. She didn't scream, didn't show pain, just stared at Ellen for a long time. The next day, Ellen was gone from court. That night, some heard water running in the hidden room behind the stables, where soldiers dumped the Queen's excess water. Someone said they saw wet hair, caught in a stone crevice. No one checked. No one dared. You tried not to think about it, but Anne's feet always reminded you. Each time you trimmed her nails, you used a small knife instead of scissors. The nails were too hard. When you braced her big toe in your palm to cut the thickest part, your skin reddened from the pressure. Once, the knife slipped, not into her flesh, into yours. Blood flowed. You hid your hand in your apron, continued as if nothing happened, because you knew your blood could spill. But if she bled, even a drop, you'd vanish like Ellen. After that, you changed your method. You filed her nails instead of cutting. Slow, steady, leaving no trace. You placed cloths between her toes to absorb sweat. You learned to breathe through your mouth the whole time. And you thought of gentle things like sunlight outside, like the countryside breeze you once knew, to forget you were kneeling beneath a cracked, calcified foot that could kill you at any moment. Each time you finished, you wiped her feet with a scented cloth, rubbed peppermint oil to preserve her nobility. She usually dozed, saying nothing, but once, while you applied oil to her ankle, she opened her eyes, looked straight at you, and asked, "Are you afraid?" You answered instantly, "No, Your Majesty." She smiled. "Good, those who aren't afraid know how to keep quiet." You nodded, but your hands were cold, because you knew not everyone could keep quiet. And in that basin, where you saw that piece of skin, there might be the punishment of someone who trembled like you. Only she wasn't as lucky, or as good at lying. From then on, every time you scrubbed the Queen's heels, you always prepared two things in your palm, a pumice stone, and a plausible excuse to escape blame if something went wrong. But you didn't always get to choose what to prepare. Some mornings, before you'd even washed the blood from the night before, someone knocked and whispered, "The makeup tools are ready." And so you stepped into another battle, not with cracked feet, but with the Queen's face, rotting day by day. You once thought applying makeup to a woman was gentle, a form of care, a kind of nurturing. But no, it was grueling labor, with bare hands, steel nerves, and a silent stomach. Because royal cosmetics weren't for the faint-hearted. It started with white powder, not the fine kind like baby powder you knew. This was a toxic mix of white lead, sulfur powder, crushed lime, and a small amount of bone ash, stored in a dented tin box, reeking of sharp metal. You had to use your hands, no cotton, no brushes, to spread it evenly over her face, neck, ears, and sometimes the backs of her hands. The powder clung like wall plaster, and if uneven, it streaked into cracks like peeling paint in a dungeon. But worse was the skin beneath. Anne's face no longer held the smoothness history praised. After years of lead, her skin was mottled, ashen, dotted with black spots like acid burns. Some areas, especially under her cheekbones, oozed blood. Each time you applied powder, you had to avoid weeping patches or pretend not to see blood on your fingertips. Once, you pressed too hard on her left cheek, and a thin layer of skin slid off with the powder, like onion skin. You stayed silent, so did she, but afterward, your meal hours were changed for 3 days, no reason given. Next was lipstick, not fragrant berry balm like village rumors. It was a mix ground from dried cochineal insects, blended with sheep fat and rat blood. Blood preserved in strong wine, congealed, deep red like old blood pudding. Each time you opened the jar, the metallic stench made you hold your breath, but you had to dip your finger in, rub it gently onto Anne's lips for an even coat. If too thick, she'd tell you to redo it. If too thin, she'd say her lips looked like a widow waiting to die. Once, you were tasked with enhancing her eyebrows, using charcoal mixed with glue. You used a wooden stick to smear the dark paste onto the arched brows, nearly gone from lead poisoning. Your hands sweated, the stick slipped. You misdrew one side. Anne glanced in the mirror, then at you, as if you'd scrawled treason on her forehead. You fixed it in time, but the feeling of a blade hovering over your neck lingered until evening. You once asked an old servant, "Why doesn't she go barefaced?" The answer was, "Because her real face is the last thing that should be shown. In a world built on symbols, what's real is what's weak. What's real bleeds, trembles, makes thrones wobble." Anne's face, without that powder and lipstick, is a cracked mask, proof of decay creeping into power. But painted by you daily, it becomes a new illusion of power. That's why, every morning, you're not just applying makeup, you're plastering a crumbling statue. You're holding up a structure with deadly compounds. Your hands always smell of metal, dried blood, and pine resin. Your fingers crack from chemicals. Your eyes are red from incense mixed with lead, but you can't tire, can't err, because a mistake means replacement, and replacements, like Ellen, are never mentioned again. One day, While dabbing lipstick, Anne whispered, "You know, sometimes I think my face has truly vanished." You paused, looked at her in the mirror, a face white as snow, lips blood red, eyebrows arched high, forehead dusted with powder, beautifully eerie. You replied, "Your Majesty, the real face doesn't matter. The face others fear is the true one." She laughed, and from that day, you were tasked with drawing a fake mole to look like French nobility. You don't know how long you'll survive under the dust of lead, the blood of lipstick, the lurking chemicals, but each time you place your hand on her forehead, spreading powder like snow, you feel almost invisible. Not human, not a servant, but the foundation, part of the ritual, a nameless tool, keeping a face from crumbling, millimeter by millimeter, each day. And you understand, death doesn't always come from an axe. Sometimes it comes from the powder jar you apply every morning, bit by bit. But sometimes, death doesn't come through the face. It comes from below the back, from what lies still, seeps deep, and molds unseen by the naked eye, like Anne Boleyn's royal mattress. You heard of the royal mattress when you first entered the palace. The phrase conjured images of a lavender-scented bed, draped in gold silk, sinking softly under weight, heavenly as paradise. But the reality, like everything around Anne, was something else entirely. A breeding ground, a microbial grave, a leper's ward without walls or medicine. You're responsible for changing the Queen's bedsheets. A task that seemed simple, until the first time you were allowed to flip the mattress. The smell made you stagger back 3 steps, nearly tripping, not because it was strong, because it was alive. It was the smell of everything that had touched Anne's body for 2 years, and never been washed. The first smell was mold, the smell of water-soaked stone walls, unaired pillows, rotting fabric, mixed with dried hair. The second was ammonia, traces of uncontrolled nighttime urination. Anne didn't leave her bed at night, didn't use a chamber pot, didn't call a servant. When needed, she went right there. A cloth under her dress was changed the next morning. The rest seeped down, through the sheets, into the mattress, stayed there. You stripped the sheets with bare hands. No gloves, no mask, because as the housekeeper said, a mask is an insult. Only those who despise their mistress need to cover their nose. So you leaned in, pulling each sheet corner from the mattress, while waves of toxic air crept up your nose like underworld smoke. Once, you saw maggots, source unknown, maybe from old blood or food spilled when she read in bed. A small, pale maggot wriggled on the mattress edge. You pinched it with your nail, tucked it in a cloth, and continued, said nothing. You once asked why they didn't replace the mattress. The answer, the mattress is sacred, blessed at her coronation. It can't be changed. But you knew the real reason was Anne's fear of disrupted sleep. She believed changing the mattress would change her fate. It would unravel her dreams of the throne, of a male heir, along with the goose feathers. So the mattress stayed. Everything was just new sheets. A quick wipe and prayers. New sheets were sprayed with perfume before laying, not to smell nice, but to mask. You sprayed layer by layer, smoothed them with numbed hands. Each time you flipped the mattress, you saw more signs of a decaying body, mold patches, shaped like petals, stains from old menstrual blood, a worn tear from her nails, scratching during sleepless nights. Some spots sank deeply, where Anne's hips pressed every night. The mattress was a map of decline, and you read it daily. Once, you felt something hard in the middle layer. You reached into a small gap and pulled out a tiny bone, maybe chicken or rat. You didn't dare ask. Just tucked it in a cloth, burned it in the fire. The room had no windows, no airflow. Every smell stayed. You changed sheets daily, but the mattress was never dry. A thin, misty dampness always coated its surface. When you pressed lightly, a faint sound came, like wet skin rubbing together. You wanted to vomit, but you'd learned to hold it in. Your eyes stared straight, hands kept working, like the days of wiping blood, brushing lice-ridden hair, applying lead powder. No one taught you to do this. You learned by not dying while doing it. One day, Anne said, "Last night I dreamed my bed was stolen. What do you think that means?" You bowed, a sign that the bed is so precious, it must be guarded tightly, Your Majesty. She smiled, slept again, and you, folding the urine-soaked sheet from the night before, felt yourself dissolving, like the foam left after decay. They say she sleeps like a goddess, peaceful, serene, regal, But you know, she sleeps on her own tomb. Each night, she sinks into the stench her body has shed. And you, the only one touching that place, no longer dream, don't dare to dream. Because your dreams always start with the squelching sound of damp skin under red velvet sheets. You survive by believing. If you clean long enough, deep enough, quietly enough, the smell might vanish. But so far it's still in your hair, your tongue, your dreams, and each morning, pulling new sheets, you whisper your familiar mantra. Please let today be the day the mattress doesn't speak, but the mattress always knows how to whisper, through its smell, through the moldy damp seeping into your hands, weaving into your hair, lodging in your throat like thick, unwashed dust. And you thought you'd gotten used to it, used to the mattress smell, used to the urine, dried blood, smoldering agarwood. But then, you met the true smell of Anne Boleyn's body, and you realized everything you'd known was just a prelude to a regal symphony of rot. It wasn't like the sweat you'd smelled on ordinary people, not like the guards training in the courtyard, not like the cook working 8 hours. Anne's smell was a refined decay, like flowers buried too long in wet soil, half-eaten by insects. A smell, not yet rotten, but no longer alive. It came from her skin, not her private parts, not her armpits, but her whole body. From her back to her elbows, from her nape to behind her knees, it exuded a warm, colorless fluid that, when touched, felt like brushing against a fish gone bad before gutting. You noticed it most on humid days, when she changed into ceremonial robes, when you leaned in to remove her outer dress, then the middle layer, then the inner one, and then the air under that fabric wafted out like the breath of a tomb, not sharp, not distinct, but blended like thin smoke, coating your hands, your back, lingering forever. There was no washing it off. After work, you scrubbed your hands with ash, strong wine, peppermint oil. Still, it stayed. Some nights, you woke because the smell burst in your nose, though you slept in the servants' quarters 3 corridors away. You tried shaving your hair, shaving it close, thinking the smell clung there. But no, it was in your skin. Once, you raised your hand to yawn and realized your tongue tasted salty, strange, a metallic, faintly fishy taste, like water used to boil spoiled meat. You were scared, but you kept working, because no one could replace you, not because you were skilled, but because you were used to it. And those used to that smell could never go back outside. Anne never asked if you noticed a strange odor. She only said once, while you rubbed oil on her shoulder, "My skin seems to be coming alive lately." You replied instantly, as always. Your skin always radiates the scent of royalty. She nodded, smiled, and you, inwardly, shuddered, because the scent you mentioned was dripping from your hand to your elbow, slick, sticky, like fermented glue. The worst was on hot days, when Anne sat reading for hours, sweat dripped from her nape onto her collar. You were ordered to wipe, gently, with a damask cloth, leaving no mark. But every cloth absorbed the smell. Some changed color, from ivory to pale brown, then gray. You once tried burning an old cloth. The smell was like scorching insects mixed with damp straw, acrid, sweet, fishy. You began to realize Anne wasn't just sweating, she was leaking death, slowly, silently, methodically. Each sweat gland was a gate to luxurious decay, and you were the gatekeeper, wiping to keep it from spilling into the halls. Others didn't know, they weren't close enough. They smelled agarwood, perfume, scented powder. They praised her mysterious aura, called it royal radiance. Only you knew it was the smell of dying skin, something no one dared name, but all feared. One night, after helping her into her nightgown, you turned to leave, but forgot your gloves on the table. When you returned, Anne was sitting, staring at her bare, sweat-flecked chest. She didn't cover up, didn't speak, then looked at you. "Do you know what that smell is?" You shook your head. She said softly, like a breath, "It's the smell of what's clung to me since my first childbirth. It never fully came out, just seeps inward." Then she closed her eyes, lay down, didn't wait for your reply. You grabbed your gloves and left, and that night, the smell followed you into your dreams, a colorless, soundless dream, Just you, standing in a field of rotting grass, each blade exuding that smell, the sweat of royalty. And you understood some smells never leave the skin, some smells are sentences. And you who thought you'd grown used to it all, still didn't know when you'd been sentenced. But when you saw a young maid slamming her head against a wall, hair loose, muttering, "Smell, smell, smell," like she was possessed, you knew that sentence has a term, and for most it's 3 months. No more. In the palace, they whispered of Anne Boleyn's curse, that she could look into someone's eyes and drive them mad, that her bed was haunted, that those who served her too long were tainted. But you knew it wasn't supernatural, not a plot, just a human body, normal, healthy, pushed into an environment no one should endure. Most new maids left the palace after about 12 weeks. Official reasons were strange illness, exhaustion, or inappropriate behavior. But you knew better. Week 1, they fainted at the smell of her undergarments. Week 3, they retched when wiping blood. Week 6, their hands shook when changing linings. By week 10, their eyes sank, no longer responding to calls. And by week 13, they either fled or started laughing for no reason. Laughing, crying, muttering, pinching their skin until it bled, screaming in dreams, thinking rats crawled in their ears. Symptoms the officials called female hysteria. But to you, it was perfectly understandable. You saw a girl named Marion, 17, blonde, pale, voice like a morning bird, become a walking corpse in just 80 days. She was assigned to assist you. Her only task was washing Anne's body cloths. Day 1, she vomited touching the warm, damp cloth from the basin. Day 3, she scrubbed her hands for an hour after each shift. Day 7, she asked you, "Does this smell follow us to our rooms?" You didn't answer, because you knew, if she could still ask, she had time. By day 74, Marion stopped asking. She worked silently, hands trembling slightly. Eyes dull. On the morning of day 81, you found her under the dressing table, stuffing her hair in her mouth, whispering, "If the smell's inside, I'll rip my guts out." She was taken away that night. You never saw her again. They said she was sent to a rest home, another name for a locked room. Why 3 months? Maybe because the human body can only withstand so long under assault, from smell, sound, and inhuman sights. You heard Anne's sharp breaths when her scabby skin was scratched. You heard lice crawling in her hair as she slept. You smelled waste mixed with musk perfume and fermented sweat. You saw her back ulcerated, oozing, covered with damask like a funeral shroud. All of it you had to witness without reacting, absorb without going mad. You couldn't say, "Oh, cover your nose," or step back, show one panicked gesture, and you'd be punished. But keep it all inside, and you'd explode. And someone would find your body in the kitchens, or see you gouging your nails with a baking skewer, like Rosalind last season. You survived by learning to play deaf. Not truly deaf, but hearing like rain through a thick wall. You pretended to have no nose, no eyes, no memory. When opening her dress, you thought of old fields. When wiping her feet, you imagined cleaning a statue. When the smell made your heart seize, you counted silently. 1, 2, 3, where am I? This isn't real. Others called it callousness. You called it the only way to stay whole, leaving her room each day. Once, you heard a courtier whisper, "The queen is truly cursed. It lives in her skin, seeps out like sweat." You almost laughed, not because you agreed, but because a curse would be easier to live with than the real smell. A curse could be exorcised. A smell clings. And Anne Boleyn's smell didn't just cling to skin, it clung to the last shred of sanity in everyone near her. You know, one day, you won't bear it either. Maybe at week 100, maybe the day you smell her in your own breath. But until then, you're still the servant who hasn't gone mad. And in this world, as long as you smile at the right time, wipe the right spot, and never mention the smell, you survive, alive, but not entirely human. Because mad or not, it's only the distance between one grimace and a lifetime of silenced lips. You learn to stay silent as a survival skill. Don't look, don't smell, don't think. But at night, when no one speaks, when darkness cloaks the windowless room, there's one thing you can't ignore, can't dismiss, can't drive away, the thing under Anne Boleyn's bed, No one is allowed to lift the Queen's mattress. No one can replace the bed frame. But everyone knows, under there is a place never cleaned. They do just one thing, sprinkle sulfur powder periodically, as if the powder could kill time or stop the bleeding of things dead years ago. You don't know what sulfur powder does, beyond its sharp, stinging smell, like rubbing salt on an ulcerated tongue. But you're tasked with sleeping under the Queen's bed each night, not on the mattress, not on the floor beside it, but right at the edge of the bed's underbelly, back against the wall, eyes facing the darkness of what's never cleaned. They call it an honor, that only the most trusted servant gets to lie there, guarding the Queen's dreams, warding off evil spirits, bearing silent witness to the sleep of royalty. But you know, it's a punishment called loyalty, a quiet exile, without chains, but gnawing at your dreams like termites in rotting beams. The first night you lie on a thin straw mat, placed by the bed's foot, you turn your face inward, avoiding looking under. But the smell gives you no choice. It rises from below, a dry, musky, faintly metallic, and old odor. Not old like ancient, but ripe with decay. The smell of dust piled over years, mixed with dripped urine, rat fur, and nameless dead things. After a few minutes, you can't stand it. You lean down, lift the blanket's edge, and you see dust as thick as a pinky finger, caked in patches. On it, strange shapes, tiny wheel tracks, rats, clumps of shed fur, an old single shoe, and in the farthest corner, a shriveled rat corpse, dry as a child's skeleton. You freeze, then slowly pull the blanket back. No cry, no retreat, no reaction, because you know, if you show you've seen, tomorrow night you'll be dragged out, replaced by someone less curious. You learn to lie on your side, face to the wall, breathing lightly. Every rustle, every gust from a door, crack under the bed, makes your heart leap, as if something's about to crawl out. But you can't move. You once dreamed you woke at midnight, saw Anne's hand reach down from the bed's edge, scratching the dust, pulling out a small box. You asked, "What's inside?" She laughed. "A piece of me. I don't remember which." You woke soaked in sweat, under your back. The straw mat was damp, like it had been urinated on. But you returned to duty the next night, because refusing is treason. The next day, while sprinkling scented powder under the bed, a speck of dust landed on your lip. You tasted something metallic, like rust mixed with raw meat. You dry heaved. No one saw. You wiped your mouth, kept scattering sulfur, eyes avoiding the dark patches. But you knew the dust was skin, hair, rotting nails, mold, time pressed tight under 80 kilos of royalty, never to be lifted. You once whispered to the oldest chambermaid in the palace, "Has the Queen's bed ever been cleaned?" She stared at you for a long time, then said only, "Once, 15 years ago, the cleaner didn't live past 2 weeks." You didn't ask further. From then on, you learned to live like the temporarily undead. Each night, lying by the bed's underbelly, you count your breaths. If the smell is sharper than usual, you hold your breath for 3 counts. If dust falls on your face, you don't wipe it. If you hear a clatter in the dark, you tell yourself, it's just wood. Though you know, wood doesn't have teeth. One night, Anne stirred, muttering in her sleep. It's still there, underneath. That baby never went anywhere. You opened your eyes, but didn't dare look up. Just lay still, amid sulfur, dead dust, and secrets warmed under the body of a woman, decaying night by night. And you understood, the space under the bed is the only place in the palace that still knows the truth. But it doesn't speak, it just seeps dust, waiting for the next person to lie beside it and listen. And you, listening for dozens of nights, gradually realize the truth isn't just under the bed, it's in Anne's every breath, in her coughs. No one taught you this, no records, no warnings. But after months in the cycle of agarwood and oozing blood, you learned each of the Queen's coughs is a signal, a soft knock on someone's life. And behind that door, usually, a disappearance, without explanation. At first, you didn't notice. One early morning, Anne coughed 3 times after drinking rose tea. 15 minutes later, a maid named Maud was summoned for negligence in changing pillow linens. No one said anything. Maud didn't return. You thought it was coincidence, until the 3rd, 4th, 5th time, every time she coughed. Dry, wet, bloody, ooze, or just a stifled throat clearing. Someone would be called out and not come back, not always immediately. Maybe the next day, maybe 3 days later, but you started seeing the pattern. So you began keeping track, not on paper. Paper could be searched. You carved tiny marks on the back of the wooden comb you used to brush her hair. One small cut for a dry cough, 2 crossing lines for a bloody cough, a horizontal line for a night cough, a dot for someone disappearing. Within a month, the comb was covered in marks. You recorded not out of curiosity, but for survival. You started predicting who'd be replaced. If she coughed dryly while changing dresses, likely the dress servant's fault. If she coughed while looking in the mirror, watch out, makeup applier. If she coughed blood after waking, probably the sheet changer's error. You once tried warning a new servant. She coughed 3 times while you were arranging combs. Be careful. She laughed, thinking you superstitious. 3 days later, she was gone, along with her drawer of belongings. While cleaning it out, you found a cloth with a faint blood stain, the blood she coughed that day. From then on, you didn't speak, just observed, just carved marks, and counted. Eventually, you couldn't distinguish her coughs from her breaths. When Anne inhaled slowly, you held your breath. When she coughed, you clenched your fists. Sometimes you saw someone pass the door, tray of water in hand, then heard a cough echo, and knew that was the last time you'd see them. The scariest was the bloody cough. Anne never admitted it. She called it cold air choking. But you washed the cloths. You saw dark bloodstains like rust amid jasmine. Each time there was blood, someone was named. The fault could be anything: too thick powder, too cold washing water, a crooked braid. But really the fault was her coughing blood, and that blood needed someone to take the blame. You started hearing coughs in your dreams. One night you dreamed Anne sat in the room's center, coughing long, steady, deliberate coughs. With each, a maid collapsed. You saw no blood, just the floor sinking like a swamp. You woke, drenched in sweat, ears ringing with the wheeze from her lungs. One day, she coughed through breakfast, coughed until her teacup shattered. You knelt nearby, hands trembling. She looked at you, eyes bloodshot, and whispered, "I think you'll need to replace the hair washer soon." You bowed, heart clenched. Lily, your only friend in the palace, was in the hair room. 3 days later, she was gone. You didn't cry, just carved another cross on the inside of your shoe, and kept working. Gradually, you saw Anne use coughs as communication. When she didn't want to scold directly, when she didn't want to say, "I'm displeased," she just coughed. One cough, the room froze. One cough, maid's eyes darted. 2 coughs, everyone tensed. Each cough was a suspended sentence, no one knowing who it would fall on. And the strange thing, Anne never coughed alone, only with others present, with an audience, with someone to take the blame for that cough. You once stood alone in her room while she slept. No sound, no cough, but as soon as someone opened the door, a cough rang out, like a warning bell. You understood. For Anne, each cough was a way to survive. If she didn't blame, she'd have to bear it. If no one took it, she'd face what was destroying her from within. So those like you, who silently counted, observed, shrank against the wall, lived longer. Not because you were skilled, but because you knew when to vanish while still present. And in your head, alongside smells, dust, moans, there's now a new rhythm. 1 cough, stay alert. 2 coughs, prepare. 3 coughs, someone's about to die. And after the 3rd cough this morning, you know it's your turn to enter the storage. Not the food storage, not the wine cellar, but the royal undergarment storage. A small, sealed room, no windows, no breeze, filled with what's never mentioned when praising a queen's elegance. You once thought a queen's undergarments would be fragrant, neat, white as snow, soft as mist. They called them hand-dyed silk from Florence, silver-threaded from Bruges, blessed lace from Amiens. But when you opened that cabinet, what poured out wasn't beauty, but a cloud of ammonia, so thick your eyes burned, like they were scalded. You stepped back instinctively, but remembered, you can't cough, can't grimace, can't let anyone see you struggling not to vomit on the spot. The cabinet was divided into 3 sections: daywear, nightwear, and special items. You never asked what they were for. All were folded flat, arranged by color from ivory to pale pink, to deep red, like dried menstrual blood, but none were clean, none were dry, and none didn't carry the body's smell. Though made of fine silk, those fabrics had endured years of nighttime urine, daytime sweat, and nameless vaginal discharge, strong enough to ruin any woven thread. They weren't washed daily, just aired with agarwood and re-scented with jasmine oil, as if spraying perfume on a corpse and calling it a holy relic. You were ordered to inspect each piece, check if it was wearable, needed mending, or too discolored. And as always, bare hands, no gloves, no mask, no complaints, just you, the silk, and the smell. The first piece you picked up was damp at the crotch. You weren't sure what it was. You didn't ask, just flipped it gently, shook off dust, and refolded. By the third piece, you saw a torn seam. Trying to fold it, your finger caught on something dry and brittle, like dried blood mixed with mucus. You jerked your hand back instinctively, but a second later, you regained calm, looked around. No one saw. You continued. Each fold was like turning pages of a bodily diary. Those undergarments were living proof of a body slowly rotting. Some had a hair stuck, not clear if it was head hair, pubic hair, or rat fur. Some smelled so strong you had to turn away to breathe before continuing. And then you saw a pair of undergarments cut in half, as if someone sliced it down the middle, then stitched it back by hand. The stitches were messy, rushed. A small blood stain lingered at the seam's edge. You held it, heart heavy, not knowing if you were touching the trace of an accident or a punishment, not daring to guess, but unable to forget. You remembered once, when Anne was furious about itching in her private area, after wearing a new set infused with ambergris. She blamed the servant for choosing the wrong silk. The next day, the laundry maid was dismissed. No one saw her again. Rumor said she'd warned the silk was moldy. No one listened. You folded the last undergarments. The smell lingered, as if the cabinet didn't hold clothes, but the breath of a body sealed shut. You closed it, locked it, but the smell clung to your fingers, your hair, your nose like an invisible tattoo. Leaving the storage, you caught another maid's glance. She stepped back, not out of fear of you, but the smell. You understood, because you were once like her. Now you're not. That night, sleeping under the bed, you dreamed you were sinking in a sea of silk, all damp, sticky, emitting soft, steady breaths, like living skin. You jolted awake, didn't scream, just trembled, and realized, even if you left that room, that ammonia smell, that secret royal scent, had settled in your lungs. And you understood, in this world, even the softest thing, silk undergarments, could become a haunt more persistent than a battlefield. Not because it's dirty, but because it's seen, held, absorbed too much that should never exist in material form. And you, who touched, folded, smelled each sticky layer, thought you couldn't be shocked anymore, until one day, you made the biggest mistake. You grimaced. Just a slight grimace. No one noticed, except Anne. That day, you were helping her change her underdress. As you pulled the thin fabric off her shoulder, you glimpsed a swollen red patch on her back. The skin was cracked, oozing pus, with a small grey-purple dent in the center, like a dead fish's eye, a scab, coin-sized, slick and pulsing with her heartbeat. You couldn't stop yourself. Your eyebrows twitched. Your eyes flickered, for 1 second. But Anne saw, though facing the mirror. She turned slowly, her gaze hard as stone. What did you just see? You bowed instantly. Your Majesty, nothing. Just, your skin is so white, it dazzled me. She stayed silent, for a long time, then laughed coldly. Then next time you're dazzled, close your eyes. Lest you see too much, you shouldn't. That night, you weren't called to sleep under the bed. Someone else took your place and didn't return. She looked like you, maybe chosen to purge the Queen's toxic air. You don't know, didn't ask, just knew the next morning, you were called back, as if your mistake had been lifted and placed on someone else. From that day, you learned to fake admiration, not just to avoid reacting, but to praise, to glorify, to turn that scab into a relic. You started with lines like, "Your Majesty, your skin is like the rising moon." Even those speckled marks have the shape of tiny constellations, that redness, like a mark bestowed on goddesses returning from the underworld. Each lie made you dry heave inside, but it felt safe. Each flattery was armor against Anne's razor-sharp gaze. Once you were ordered to apply ointment to her ankle, where two small lumps had formed. You said, "They're like forgotten pearls." She laughed. You got an extra bread ration. You got creative. Each sore was a star. Each peeling patch a remnant of a beauty battle. Each inflamed pore a gate of a ruler's spirit. You grew so skilled you weren't sure if you were lying or truly seeing it. And the strange thing, Anne believed, or needed to believe, because otherwise she'd have to admit her body was rotting, and you, the servant, were the only one seeing the unpowdered truth. She couldn't allow that, so you became the secret keeper, the soothsayer for a living corpse, the beautifier of decay. You once applied ointment to a spreading eczema behind her ear, smelling like snake fat mixed with tar. As you dabbed it with your finger, Anne asked, "Is there a smell?" You replied, "Yes, Your Majesty, like a forge for souls." She laughed, closed her eyes, didn't ask again. Some nights, you dreamed you stood in the palace, before hundreds, presenting Anne's ailments like treasures. Here is the chronic itch of Holy Mother Anne. Here is the sacred rash that shifts with the moon's cycle. The crowd clapped. You bowed, smiled, then woke, hands still tracing the air, as if applying ointment to a scab. You overcame fear, not by resisting, but by transforming, turning the grotesque into the noble, turning oozing sores into symbols, turning pained moans into anthems of royalty. And you understood surviving in this palace isn't about not lying. It's about lying so well, others need to believe you more than their own bodies. And if you do it well, maybe you'll be rewarded with a scab of your own, like an honor, a goddess's mark. Because in Anne Boleyn's world, anything touching her, blood, pus, breath, or lies, must be labeled sacred. Except one thing, sneezing. Never sneeze in front of her. Don't think a simple nasal reflex will be overlooked. No, to Anne, a sneeze is an explosion shattering the spiritual order she's crafted for herself. She sees it as an ill omen, a crack in the perfect structure of the day, a sign that someone with foreign air has breached her sacred atmosphere. You learned this from her looks, those icy glares following that familiar sound, and a story you'll never forget. The maid was named Beatrice, skin pale as porcelain, voice soft as silk. She stood behind the curtain, waiting to hand over powder, mirror, cloth, undergarments. One day, as Anne was being lipsticked, you held the stick. Beatrice, 5 steps away, suddenly sneezed, softly, a faint sound, but it rang like thunder in the silent room. Everyone froze. You didn't dare turn. Anne stopped breathing for a beat. Her hand gripped her collar, lips pursed, as if swallowing herself. Then she said, "Stop, clear the powder, get another jar. The air's been tainted." Beatrice knelt, bowed low, apologized. Anne didn't respond, just ordered her, taken to her quarters. 2 days later, word came she was sent home to recover from cold air. But everyone knew those sent home never returned. From then the room learned a lesson. When your nose itches, bite your lip, pinch your hand, claw your soles, do anything to stop the sound. Some dug nails into their thighs until they bled to stifle a sneeze. Some fainted from holding their breath too long while cleaning fallen hair. You almost made that mistake once. One winter morning, kneeling to fasten Anne's shoes, the overpowering incense mixed with damp air made you want to sneeze until you went mad. It felt like your nose was being clawed by thorns, but you knew one sound, one sneeze, and you'd be taken away, not killed instantly, but a different death, erased. You clenched your teeth, pressed your knees, imagined yourself a stone with no nostrils. Your eyes teared, but you survived. Later in the corridor, you let out 3 sneezes, sounding like freedom. Then you cried, not from pain, but from relief. You'd lived another day. Anne never said, "You must not sneeze." She didn't need to. A glance or silence was enough. Those who'd heard a sneeze lead to punishment knew the law was harsher than any decree, because it was rooted in superstition, enforced by collective silence. They say Anne once had a nightmare. She was being crowned, wearing peacock feathers, holding a scepter, when a servant sneezed from afar. She turned, saw herself in a mirror, and in it, she had no face. Since then, she believed a sneeze was a knock from the other world, a crack in the magic of control. And when she lost control, others paid the price. Even the powder jars were later mixed with mint and anise, not for fragrance, but to suppress itch-causing smells. Every room had a vapor jar, emitting grapefruit and arsenic to block foreign air. And you, entering her room, always took a deep breath, hoping your nose wouldn't betray you. Because you knew, in this world, dying from smells was common. But dying from a sneeze was the quietest death. No funeral, no name, no mention. Just you, a scented cloth tucked in your pocket, and a morning whisper, "Today, may my nose stay silent as a loyal servant." And for months after, your nose was utterly loyal. It didn't quiver, didn't sting, didn't make a sound that could cost you your head. But then, one morning, as you stepped into Anne's room, amid air thick with incense, ammonia, dried sweat, menstrual blood, and toxic powder, you smelled nothing. Not because the room had been cleaned, not because she'd changed her scent, but because your nose had died. You tried moving closer to the tray of undergarments, things that once made you retch. No reaction. You leaned over Anne's back, applying ointment to a fungal patch, once so foul it numbed your tongue. Still nothing. You panicked, but didn't speak. No one noticed, because outwardly, you still worked, still cleaned, still sprayed perfume, still changed dresses, still slept under the bed, as usual. The only difference was, the world no longer had smells. Days later, you noticed your tongue began to taste bitter, not from illness, but because everything you ate, bread, tea, water, carried the same faint metallic tang, like chewing cold ash. Even your favorite, stewed apples with honey, tasted no different from rotten paper. You bit, swallowed, and felt nothing. And then you understood, you were no longer living like a human. At first you thought it might be the aftermath of incense, toxic powder, sulfur, and the stench of death, soaked in too long. But gradually, you realized it was your body's strangest defense mechanism, refusing to feel to help you survive. Desperately, you tried to wake yourself, bit chili, sniffed raw lime, sprinkled pepper in your nose. All it did was make your eyes water, while your mind stayed empty. Once, you fell into an uncleaned chamber pot, and when you got up, you were as calm as if sitting by a village well. That's when you knew something inside you had died. No one asked, no one knew, but an old maid, who'd served 3 queens, saw you cleaning the room without a cloth over your face and whispered, "Now you belong to this place." You looked up, wanting to argue, but couldn't, because she was right. You no longer distinguished foul from fragrant, no longer shuddered at scabs or dried blood, no longer flinched when a louse fell on your hand. You had no reflexes left. The last thing keeping humans from touching what shouldn't be touched. Now you were part of this room, like the dust, the fabric, the lid powder caked on Anne's mirror. One day, Anne turned to you and asked, her voice light as vapor, "Don't you smell anything?" You replied, "No, Your Majesty. The scent today is very pure." She laughed. "Then you've been here long enough. Those who survive here lose their sense of smell first. The nose is a traitor." You nodded, not because you agreed, but because you no longer knew what a traitor's smell was. From then on, you worked like a ghost. No sensation, no thought. You brushed hair, changed sheets, applied ointment, wiped the mattress, checked undergarments, as if operating a precise machine in a factory of decay. You had only one sense left, hearing, to catch Anne's coughs and know who was next to be replaced. Sometimes, you tried stepping into the palace garden, breathed deeply, but nothing changed. The scent of flowers was gone. The smell of rotting wood, mud, kitchen fires, all slipped away as if they'd never existed. You sat by the pond, water reflecting your face, pale, blank, like an unpainted mask. And in that moment, you knew you no longer smelled, because you no longer belonged to the world of the living. You were part of this castle, of Anne, of the windless room. You were a shadow moving among smells you once feared, avoided, retched at, now just air. You weren't dead, but death lived through you, smoldering, silent, and odorless. And because you no longer felt anything, or reacted to anything, you were given a new task, directly serving Anne's detox meals, or, as the maids whispered, never daring to say aloud, the gut-cleansing meals. These meals weren't frequent, only when she felt bad humors rising to her liver, or when a maid suddenly fell ill, or simply when she looked in the mirror and saw herself, greener than yesterday. That was the sign. And when it appeared, a silver tray was brought in. No flowers, no tea, no grapes, just a large bowl, brimming with thick, glossy liquid, reeking as if someone stirred the bottom of a barrel of dead fish and mixed it with sewer water. You had to stand beside her during the ritual. First, 3 sips of traditional purgative, extracted from a strange tree resin, murky brown, bitter enough to strip the stomach lining if taken wrong. Next, a mix of freshly chopped herbs, blended with fermented fish oil, an oil so potent that opening its lid made the room thick as a summer morgue. Finally, she'd eat a raw egg yolk, soaked in herbal vinegar, said to cleanse the soul through the gut. You had to wipe her mouth after each spoonful, and each time, your fingers caught some mucus from the potion mixed with drool. You couldn't wash your hands, couldn't cover your nose, only silently chant, all for Her Majesty's health. Anne ate as if performing a sacrificial rite, eyes closed, lips pursed, forehead creased. Each sip was a battle, and when the battle ended, the tsunami began. She vomited from her stomach, her guts, from the deepest corners of her body. No one thought could pour out like that. And you, of course, cleaned it all. Many couldn't bear it. 4 died from vomiting too much. A young servant, seeing it for the first time, vomited until her esophagus bled out. Another held it in, but choked on her own vomit, back in her room. An older maid simply collapsed on the spot, head hitting the basin's edge, never rising again. Death wasn't always a beheading. Some deaths came from watching someone rip their body apart, spoonful by spoonful, then making you stay to wipe it clean, as if nothing happened. After each vomit, Anne sat still, breathed lightly. You used a damask cloth to wipe her chin, her dress, the floor. The smell of vomit, mixed with purgative, incense, and dead fish rose, enveloping you like an invisible cloak of disgust. But you, with a dead nose and numbed tongue, no longer reacted. You just wiped by instinct, wiped like a ritual. You once heard her say, voice hoarse after a cleansing, "People think power is a crown, but real power is keeping what you just vomited, if you choose." You nodded, not because you understood, but because you no longer knew what logic was. Once, while wiping, you found something hard in the vomit, small, round, like a tooth fragment. You didn't ask, just picked it up, wrapped it in a cloth, tossed it in the fire. But you still felt it lingering somewhere in your dreams. Worst was when she didn't vomit it all out. When the cleansing only emptied halfway, the rest stayed in her gut all day. Then, you'd see Anne grimace all morning, bloated, bad humors building, and everything around her paid the price. A maid slapped for a crooked braid, a servant banished for choosing the wrong handkerchief color, and you wiping nosebleed-stained shoes. Gradually, you stopped finding it repulsive, stopped finding it strange. Only one thing lingered, a bizarre admiration. Admiration for someone who could torture herself to that degree, then rise, don a crown, smile at the king. And you understood, power wasn't controlling others, it was controlling the most repulsive parts of yourself, then making others clean the aftermath. That was the true definition of power in this palace. And you, having wiped everything from vomit to menstrual blood, from fish oil to rat droppings, thought you'd seen all a rotting body could expel. But then, one morning, she turned to you and said, "Don't forget, today is Herb Day." You understood. It was time to meet a new smell, the royal private scent. No one said it outright. They called it low incense, inner mist, or harem fragrance. But you knew it was the accumulated smell of vaginal discharge, dried blood, lingering urine, unwiped sweat, and bacteria thriving between 3 layers of silk dresses, never changed at once. The treatment ritual began each morning. Before changing into a new dress, you took from a small wooden drawer a silk pouch of 7 herbs: star anise, mugwort, cinnamon bark, nutmeg, crushed camphor, dried magnolia, and finely chopped peony root. The mix, blended in a secret ratio, was packed into palm-sized sachets. Your task was to tuck these sachets into the innermost dress layer, right between her thighs, where everything needed hiding. No misplacement. Not too fast, not too slow. If your hands were cold, she'd shudder and glare. If the sachet was off-center, you could be slapped instantly. You remembered your first slap, not hard, but sudden and loud, just for tucking slightly to the right, making her feel unbalanced in her humors. Your lip bled, but you didn't cry, just bowed and said, "I'll adjust your majesty's scent more evenly." You learned to tuck precisely through 3 layers, coarse silk undergarments, a thin lace-edged dress, and a heat-retaining dress lined with rabbit fur. Each layer had a small slit for the sachet. The innermost was the most dangerous, because you came close to where no one was allowed to touch, and you, the one who no longer smelled, no longer felt, was the only one who could do it. Some mornings, in humid weather, the smell rose earlier than usual. Kneeling behind her dress, sliding your hand, you felt a warm breath, like a dragon's ribs, exhaling from a stone crevice. Not strong, not sharp, but persistent, like the scent of an old book, soaked and dried with incense. Anne never asked, "How's the smell today?" She only said, "You know I prefer cinnamon to anise, and today, I want it to smell green, not red." You nodded, and learned to blend scents, though you smelled nothing anymore. Once, short on herbs, you substituted a bit of mint. The next morning, she frowned. "Something's too fresh down there. Do you think I'm a child?" You were punished to stand in the courtyard one night, where the dew chilled your lungs. From then, you didn't dare experiment. The Queen's private scent wasn't for testing. You wondered why not wash thoroughly, change undergarments more often, but you knew it would disrupt Anne's structure of vitality. She believed too clean was empty, and empty invited possession. So the smell was kept, only lightly managed with those herb sachets. And you, the one who lost your sense of smell, became the final guardian of a scent no one could name. Each morning, you slid your hand, adjusted, folded the dress, and whispered in your mind, "May the weather be stable today, and the herbs strong enough." You no longer felt shame, no longer felt inconvenience, only a deep emptiness, as if your hand was reaching into something no longer alive, but not yet dead. And you understood the closest place to royalty wasn't the throne, but the distance of 3 dress layers between your fingers and a smell not allowed in any dictionary. Yet it existed, clearly, persistently, and each morning you touched it, as if pressing into the very bowels of a decaying goddess. But you couldn't stay silent, couldn't let the room sink into the quiet of dead herbs and damp dresses, because when sound vanished, the only thing left was Anne's moans, and that was forbidden. So, you had to sing, every morning, while wiping sweat from her armpit, not to entertain, not to sweeten the air, but to cover the muffled groans of a woman breaking apart in silence. And the smell from her arm, the black hole between body and power, was the greatest challenge you'd ever known. You remembered the first time you were assigned this. An older maid pushed you into the room at dawn, handed you a cloth, and whispered, "Just wipe the left side. The right has someone else. And remember, don't let the room get too quiet." You stepped in, knelt beside the chair where Anne leaned back, dress half on, arms slightly raised, revealing dark, drenched, speckled skin like boiled toad hide. You bowed, lifted the cloth, and the smell hit your face, stronger than anything you'd touched, rancid fat mixed with ammonia, old powder, soaked in sweat, incense unable to mask the body's acid, heavier than horse dung, because it wasn't animal, it was a human eating itself from within. Your hand trembled, she moaned softly, one sound, but like tearing skin, and you remembered the instruction, sing. You weren't prepared, no music, you just blurted an old lullaby your mother sang. The wind sways the bamboo gently, your voice was small, choked, but enough. Anne said nothing, just kept moaning softly. You kept wiping small circles around the armpit, where sweat thickened like glue. After that, singing while wiping sweat became a ritual. Each morning, you changed the song, sometimes a requiem, sometimes a folk tune from the old lake region, sometimes just wordless humming, a string of meaningless sounds to mask the grimaces, wheezing breaths, and sometimes stifled sobs from deep in Anne's chest. You discovered her armpit was the first place her body signaled decay, veins close to the skin, clogged sweat glands, discolored skin. Some days you wiped yellow pus mixed with sweat. Some days the cloth caught old powder blended with sweat, forming a gritty paste like rusted mud. But you still looked up, smiled, and sang. Your arm smells like incense, steeped in late autumn sun. Anne didn't laugh, but she didn't slap you, and that was enough. You remembered most one time. While wiping, she softly asked, "Do you think I'm still beautiful?" You didn't stop, just answered, without thinking, "Your Majesty, your sweat is a sign of vitality. I only wish to breathe your life each morning." She was silent, then said softly, "Good, because sometimes I forget I'm still alive." From then, you sang louder, not because she needed it, but because you needed something to fill the void in your mind, where fear, boundaries, and human reactions once lived. Now, nothing remained, just the song and her body's smell. Once, a new servant watching you wipe asked quietly, "How do you sing through that smell?" You looked at her, then said, "When you no longer know what you're breathing. Singing is the only way to remember you're not dead." And you understood, amid the moans, coughs, and silent decay of flesh, your singing wasn't music. It was the final mask to keep touching what no one should touch, and still call it duty. But one day, Anne stopped moaning. No need for singing. She just looked at you for a long time, with empty eyes, no longer commanding, no longer angry, and said, "I want to bathe." You froze. Bathe? The last time she mentioned water was to scold someone for diluting her tea. But this time she didn't say water. She said, "Ashes, clean ashes, from the one who once sanctified me." You didn't dare ask, but the eunuch came that night, bringing a thick cloth sack containing the ashes of an old priest who'd baptized Anne, now dead, cremated in a special rite, his ashes kept as a talisman. You were tasked with preparing the bath, but no tub, no water, no clean cloth, just a small copper basin where you sprinkled ashes, mixed with scented oil and a bit of ox blood to activate the purifying energy. The smell was worse than anything you'd ever wiped. Burnt ash, mixed with rust, and an aftertaste like a half-cremated corpse. Anne sat on a wooden chair with a backrest. No dress, just a thin silk sheet to her knees. You knelt, slowly dipped a cloth in the ash basin, and began wiping, from her feet, pinky toe, cracked heel, to her ankle, shin, calves dry and grey as rotted wood. You wiped each toe, wondering, is this the last thing I do for her, or a living funeral? Because during the entire rite, Anne said nothing, didn't moan, didn't frown, just looked down, occasionally moving her lips as if chanting a spell. When you reached her knees, she raised a hand to stop you. "Only that far," she said. "Above, I don't need forgiveness." You nodded, stepped back, wiped your hands in silence. Ashes clung to your skin, seeped into your nail crevices. No amount of washing cleaned it. Perhaps it had entered your blood. Those ashes, once the flesh and bone of a dead man, now soaking into the living, to cleanse someone, not yet dead. The next morning, Anne woke later than usual. No call for tea, no call for hair brushing. You entered, saw her leaning against a window locked for a month, staring at a courtyard no one dared tread. "Do you know why I bathed in ashes?" You shook your head. She spoke slowly, each word teetering on her cracked lips. "Because water can't wash sins, but ashes hold them, so I don't forget." You didn't ask more, just bowed. That night, you dreamed you dipped your hands in ashes, but beneath was human skin, and you kept wiping, until your own hands crumbled into dust, blending into the mess. You woke, hands trembling, but looking down, they were your familiar hands, except the smell of ashes lingered, clung to your wrists, as if you too had been bathed. 3 days later, Anne didn't leave her bed. She wasn't sick, no fever, just didn't rise. And everyone knew she'd had her final bath, not in water, but in the ashes of memories she wanted to keep, to enter decay fully aware. And you, who wiped those toes, no longer needed to wipe anything, but couldn't leave either, because you, like the ashes, were forever stuck in this room. And then, when you thought you'd seen the most terrifying things on the Queen's body, from fungal toenails to private parts steeped in the scent of dead herbs, you made the gravest mistake. You looked at her face when you shouldn't have. It was dawn. The sky was foggy, the palace silent, and you were ordered to change the bed sheets while she still slept. A familiar task, not too difficult. But as you leaned to adjust the sheet under her neck, the blanket slipped from her face. The protective fabric, the fabric hiding the truth. the fabric, concealing the white lead powder. You meant to pull it back, but your hand froze. Your eyes lingered. At the exact moment, Anne Boleyn's true face appeared. No lipstick, no powder, no mask, just skin, bone, and something that no longer looked human. Her eye sockets were sunken, dark as worm burrows, puffy bags under her eyes, rimmed with mold-like purple. Her bare lips, without rouge, cracked in layers like drought-parched earth. The skin sagged around her cheeks, no longer regal, but like wet cloth draped loosely over bone. Worst was her forehead and temples, where lead powder had damaged the skin, now mottled red, speckled with pale white patches, some spots cracked, some oozed pus, all bound by a wrinkle across her forehead, so deep it seemed carved by a knife. You froze, not from fear she'd wake, but because you couldn't define what lay before you. Not a person, not quite a corpse. Something caught between two worlds, a being alive through a false layer and one dead since that layer formed. You wanted to look away, but you knew, if you turned, you'd wake her with the slightest stir, and she'd know you saw. And if she knew, you might vanish like all those who knew too much. So you bowed low, as if in reverence, and closed your eyes, while the smell from her skin wafted, unmasked by perfume, rising like meat, hung long in a cold stone cellar. Cold, sharp, with a metallic, musty aftertaste. You changed the sheet slowly, light as touching ash. You didn't look again, didn't think again, but that face, it burned into your eyes, like a sunburn. From that day, when you applied her powder, you no longer imagined her beautiful. You no longer believed the powder could make her goddess-like. You saw only a skull wearing a moldy mask. She still demanded your praise. Is my forehead even today? You replied, Your Majesty, as even as the 8th-month moon. She smiled, but your spine chilled, because you knew beneath that moon was a swamp of decay. Once, you tried drawing that face on paper, but your hand shook. Each time you tried to draw her eyes, you could only manage 2 black pits. Her mouth, a tight seam, as if barring sound from escaping. Finally, you tore the paper, burned it, but the smoke rose with a smell you thought you'd forgotten. From that day, you never looked directly at Anne's face before she was made up. You approached in darkness. You wiped her face with a cinnamon-scented wet cloth, not daring to look. When applying the first layer of lead powder, you closed your eyes, like chanting a prayer, because you knew you were hiding a death that still breathed. And you understood those who loved Anne, the king, the envoys, even herself, never knew what they kissed. They kissed paint over decay. They loved a voice from a shell. They worshipped a face long rotted, but not yet declared dead. And you, the only one to see her bare face, understood one thing. Death could wear velvet dresses, pearl necklaces, and speak in a queen's voice. But there was a deeper truth, realized after 1535, and that was even the so-called physicians began vanishing from her room. After that year, doctors stepped back. At first their visits grew rare, then they sent medicines through maids, not daring to deliver them in person. Finally, none dared stand closer than 3 steps from Anne, even when she called their names at night, voice hoarse from coughing, hands trembling from pain. Why? Rumors abounded. Some said she had an unnamed disease, something the church had no record of, while commoners whispered it was the possession of children she couldn't keep. Others said blood rot, skin decay, organs refluxing, but no one dared confirm, because naming the wrong disease could cost your head. You once saw a brief examination, just minutes long, end with a doctor dragged away at night. That man, Thomas Belgrave, said she might have severe gut inflammation, needing to avoid oils and detox with warm water instead of fish oil. Anne didn't respond, just nodded. But the next morning, his body was found in the palace garden, eyes wide, hands severed, mouth stuffed with laurel leaves. From then, every remaining doctor learned to speak vaguely. Your Majesty, your humours are most unique. Your inner heat is shifting seasons. You're entering a mystical phase of the queenly cycle. No one said disease. No one dared say rot, fester, infection, because one word making her feel mortal, and you'd be replaced by someone who lied better. You overheard an old doctor, trembling, tell you, I don't treat her illness. I perform luck rituals with a stethoscope. You asked, what if she's really dying? He laughed, eyes cloudy as smoke. Then I'm the last to know, and the last to see the sun. Instead of treatment, they performed rituals, hands on her forehead, muttering charms, dripping chicken blood on pillows, burning strange incense mixed with infant grave soil. Some nights, you had to place carp bone talismans on her chest. Not to heal, but to ward. No one believed it worked, but everyone did it. Because curing wrong could kill you, but warding couldn't be proven wrong. Her condition worsened, skin darkened like burnt wood, breath smelled like wine, fermented in fish guts, but no one dared speak, even when she fainted mid-afternoon. Instead of calling a doctor, maids brought scented cloths, and you wiped her forehead with rose liquor, rubbed her palms with cinnamon oil, and whispered, "You're just tired from the weather." And Anne believed, or needed to believe, because the truth didn't suit the title queen. One night, you secretly read her old medical log, locked in a hidden drawer. In it, a trembling handwritten note, skin starting to crack, odor changing, reacting to light. And in the margin, another note, unsigned, not illness, a divine variant. You closed the book, never opened it again, because you understood here, truth wasn't needed. Truth had to be wrapped in gold, incensed, and buried under white powder. After 1535, you never heard anyone in the palace use diagnosis. No more medicine, no more advice, only rituals, and you, the maid, became doctor, exorcist, and corpse wiper, all at once. You knew she was dying, layer by layer, but you never said so.
He only said,
"Your Majesty's complexion today shines like the new moon," and Anne nodded, while you thought, that's not a moon, that's the color of skin preparing to dissolve from within. And you, who wiped that decay daily, still had to praise it with verses borrowed from holy books, thought you'd grown used to every smell, until one day, you realized, the scariest thing in this palace wasn't the stench, but the fragrance. That morning, as you opened Anne's door, you froze instantly, not for anything visible, but because the room suddenly smelled strangely sweet. Not the heavy reek of fish oil, not the smouldering mugwort, not the sickly breath of month-old incense, but a delicate, refined scent, teasing like lilacs at a royal wedding, a smell that shouldn't exist here. You said nothing, just bowed, kept working, but your spine was ice cold. Each breath passed through a fine mist, laced with tiny diamonds, and you remembered, the sweeter the smell, the closer someone was to falling. 3 hours later, while wiping Anne's hands, a maid named Isolde staggered in, carrying a tea tray. She collapsed near the pillow. 10 minutes later, a second maid, Martha, fell backward while fastening a button, eyes rolled back, mouth foaming. Anne didn't react, just frowned slightly, then waved, changed the tea. These two couldn't handle spring. You bowed, but in your head, a bell rang. The fragrance was a signal, not of welcome, but of warning. Warning that something had been mixed into the scent, and those without enough resistance or rank would be the first test subjects. You began recalling unnaturally fragrant times. One winter, Anne's room was scattered with fresh jasmine. The next morning, 4 maids fell ill from allergies. Another time, a priest brought a new ambergris vial. The kitchen cleaner later coughed blood, all labeled coincidence. But you understood, in the palace, nothing was coincidence, only tests and testers. From then, you developed a new reflex. When it smelled sweet, hold your breath. Don't swallow. Don't open your mouth. Don't approach the room's center. Sometimes, you feigned dizziness, collapsing to avoid inhaling more. Sometimes, you hid under the bed, covering your nose with your sweat-soaked dress hem. The only thing you trusted as natural, Anne never confirmed. She only said, fragrance is a weapon, but one that leaves no blood. Then she turned away, leaving you to wipe vomit-covered floors, to clean tear streaks from the faces of the fallen. Their eyes always stayed open, always fixed on the incense jar. You overheard a physician whisper, a certain gas, when burned, smells like lilacs, but in enough doses bursts veins, disrupts hearts, and shrinks lungs like clamshells. It wasn't for killing the important, it was for filtering maids, weeding out the weak, refining the space around the queen to leave only those worthy of enduring the scent of power. You were among the few who survived over 10 overly fragrant rooms, not because you were strong, but because you no longer smelled anything. Your dead sense of smell, now a blessing. You became the one who didn't react, didn't collapse, didn't convulse, as if immune to every intent. And so, you were trusted more, given more tasks, kept closer to Anne. But each time the room smelled sweet, you shivered because you knew someone would fall. Maybe the chamber pot cleaner, maybe the water boiler, maybe you. If one day the scent was too strong and you inhaled through your skin, fragrance became a nightmare. You began fearing flower scents. Morning tea, days when Anne smiled and said, "The air feels pleasant today," because you knew pleasant meant tainted, and you understood the smell of power wasn't blood, not iron, but a scent that made you smile, then die before you realized. But if the smell didn't kill you instantly, it would silently take root in your blood, your lungs, your liver, slowly pushing you to a place where you no longer recognized your own body. Like when you started getting your first sores, they didn't come all at once, just a red dot on your wrist, where your skin often brushed Anne's dress hem while adjusting herbal sachets. At first you thought it was an insect bite, but then it swelled, burned, itched like ants crawling in your bones. After 2 days it burst oozing yellow fluid with a stench like meat left in the sun for 3 days. You bandaged it, told no one. Then a second appeared, under your jaw, near your left ear. This time, a hard swelling, not itchy, not painful, but changing color by the hour. Moss green in the morning, lead gray at noon, coffee ground dark by night, and you began to understand your body was speaking to you. A language only those who touched decaying power could comprehend. You didn't go to the apothecary, didn't seek help, because you knew this place had no cure for the disease of standing too close to royalty. Just as no one asked why your fingers calloused, why your palms peeled like snake scales, why your back ached in bursts, as if someone lit coals on your spine, because they knew, but they were used to not asking. You still moved, still wiped sweat, changed dresses, sang when she moaned, but in every motion, you felt your skin stretch as if about to burst. Some spots oozed pus into your underclothes. Some days you had to loosen buttons to bear the friction, but you still smiled, because here, anyone who stopped smiling before permitted, disappeared. A maid named Cecily once whispered, seeing the sore on your neck, "Do you have bear grease?" I heard it, soothes. You just shook your head, not because you didn't have it, but because you knew nothing could soothe corrosion from within. Gradually, you began resembling Anne, not just in enduring, not just in your breath heavy with incense and pus, but in how your skin reacted to everything. Touching silk too long reddened it, smelling incense too long made it itch, standing near her too long made it blister, as if burned by light from within. You realized she didn't infect you with disease, but with her presence. The prolonged existence of someone refusing death turned everyone around her into secondary vessels, and you, the closest, the only one staying each night, were naturally the first to decay alongside her. Once, you stood before a mirror, the small one in the fabric storeroom, and saw your back by candlelight, to red spots, white flecks, cracked skin like a map of a continent about to drown in a flood. You didn't cry, just nodded slightly. You applied white powder to your neck, like Anne, used scented oil to mask the smell, like Anne, drank a bit of ground incense each morning, like Anne, not to mimic, but because you had no other choice. You were becoming her, a fainter version, less powerful, and no one was obliged to respect. The scary part wasn't the pain. It was that no one asked, no one offered medicine, no one warned, no one even glanced, because to them, you'd become part of this room, like the mold-scented mattress, the incense-soaked walls, the ever-warm basin, no one dared check the source of. And you understood, living too close to power didn't make you stronger. It only made you rot faster, without anyone needing to say it. because in this palace's ecosystem, what lasted longest wasn't beauty, but whoever stayed silent best as they decayed, layer by layer. You washed your face, bandaged sores, wore thicker clothes so no one could see. But you knew, one day, Anne herself would ask, "What's that red on your neck?" And you'd bow, smile, and say, "Your Majesty," perhaps a mark passed from the goddess to her most loyal servant. And she'd nod, and you would keep rotting, in silence, like a prolonged ritual no one dared end. Until that morning, when the door burst open, when the iron boots of soldiers echoed in the damp corridor, when you were holding the red lipstick, your hand still smeared with dried blood from a crack on her chin. That was the day Anne Boleyn was arrested. But you still had to finish her makeup. No one warned, no drums, no trumpets, just the wooden door crashing open like breaking bone, and the shadow of armor flooding a room used to incense and rotting flesh. Anne startled, but didn't flee, didn't scream. She sat still, eyes wide, lips pursed, hand lightly clutching yours, as if you, the pus-ridden, sore-covered servant, were the last thing tethering her to life. You kept going, smoothed powder on her forehead. White powder, thick, cold, crumbling like ground bone. You spread it evenly, covered the wrinkle running between her eyes, the one you'd called the brow of one who sees humanity's fate. Now, it looked like a gash from an unstruck blade, prophesying. Anne trembled, the first time you saw her truly tremble, not from cold, not from pain, but from fear of no longer being an image. She knew, when they came to drag her away, she'd ceased to be a symbol, just a body, a sentence, a head on the block. But you knew, she didn't fear death. She feared being seen unfinished. So you kept applying makeup, wiped her tears with a gold-embroidered silk cloth. Her favorite, because it makes tears look like morning dew on gold. You retouched her lips, smudged from her tight grimace. You dabbed magnolia oil on her temples, not for scent, but so the soldier bending to pull her up would smell power one last time. When the officer signaled, Anne didn't stand immediately. She turned to you, whispered, "Am I beautiful?" You nodded. Like the day you were crowned, she closed her eyes, then stood alone. No one helped. Her dress swept the floor, sleeves trailing like a veil over her end. She walked out, steps light, as if heading to a wedding, not the scaffold. You stayed, weren't dragged away, weren't questioned, maybe because you were no one, or maybe because you, like the powder on her face, had become inseparable from what was about to be erased from history. When the room emptied, you stood there, staring at the mirror that reflected her face thousands of times. This time, it reflected someone else. You, holding the trembling powder brush, eyes red, and a face starting to resemble Anne's eerily. You knew she was about to die, but the powder you applied would outlive her head on the block, live in the memories of witnesses, in the fearful eyes of guards, in the whispers of surviving maids, in how history would rewrite, but couldn't erase her face as she was taken. And you understood, applying powder to someone about to be beheaded meant you'd just made up death itself. And if done well, death would be met with admiration, not for courage, but for beauty, because she didn't tremble until a blade trembled for her. And you, who applied that final powder to a soon-severed forehead, thought that was your last role in this murky drama of incense and power. But you were wrong. Your final role wasn't the makeup artist. It was the witness to the last smell. That morning, the sky was still. No drums, no trumpets. No one cried, just mist, thin as smoke, but colder than the blade about to fall. You were ordered, stand 3 steps from the scaffold. Don't move, don't collapse. Not because anyone wanted you to witness, but because you were the last one who touched Anne, wiped her tears, seen her face bare of powder. You had to confirm the final smell. Anne was led out in a black dress, hands steady, feet firm, but when her head fell, no one saw that moment. They only heard a thud, brief, wet, like a knife slicing soft, ripe fruit, and then smoke rose. No one planned to burn the body, but that was the order from above. No funeral, no burial, just fire, to leave nothing behind. No ashes, no hair, no name. A pyre was built beside the scaffold, and the body, No longer Anne, just skin, flesh, hair, blood, was dragged up like a torn sack, placed on oil-soaked dry wood. You stood there, holding the old gold-embroidered silk cloth, the one that wiped her tears before she left the room. The fire caught quickly, body fat dripped, making the flames crackle, and the smell, it broke everything you'd known about smells. Not the smell of roasting meat, not just burning hair, but the smell of someone who'd been power, faith, obsession, now burned to a husk, returning to earth in thick grey-yellow smoke. Her hair burned first, the hair you'd brushed, now charred like tar-soaked rope. Then her skin, the skin you'd powdered each morning, blistered, cracked, shrank like burning silk. At times you heard her breathe, but it was just gas escaping from her cracked chest. You didn't cover your nose, didn't bow your head, didn't close your eyes, because you were ordered. The last servant must witness until there's nothing left to serve. You stood, feet cold, face burning, smoke enveloped you like an invisible tattoo, seeping into your hair, collar, every sore on your back. And for the first time in months, you smelled something, not clear, not complete, but there, a smell hitting like a stifled scream, the smell of what was once called Anne. You trembled, not from fear, but because your nose, thought dead, revived just to receive this farewell smell. And that was the scariest thing. You'd become immune to rot, but not to the smell of an ending. The soldier beside you vomited, a maid fainted, but you stood, eyes unblinking, lips sealed, because you understood, if you grimaced, you'd taint this final sacred moment. Because the fire wasn't just burning a body, it was burning an era, an empire, something no one dared name. When the fire died, only ash remained, and a black smudge shaped like an arm, unburned. You stepped forward, took the cloth, wrapped that ash, and placed it in a small wooden box. No one ordered it, but you knew it was your final duty, not grand, just K.E. The Peem something of Anne. What remained after all the rouge, powder, rituals and power? And you murmured, not sure if to her or yourself. You burned as you lived, loud, full of smell, and letting no one turn away. You didn't cry, just bowed and walked away, carrying the smell of char on your skin, the last smell you truly sensed in your life. After that, your nose went silent forever. Nothing left worth smelling, because the only one you'd served had become smoke, and smoke leaves no shape, only memory and smell. But what you didn't know, as you left the scaffold, as you took your final step from Hampton Court, was that smell would never leave you. Though you lived, grew old, hid in an unknown village, farming, grinding herbs, teaching children to write, the smell clung like part of your body. Villagers said you had strange eyes, always gazing far off, even when peeling turnips. Children avoided you when you entered the chapel. The village cats never sat in your lap, though you kept dried fish in your sleeve. You didn't blame them. You knew they smelled something you wouldn't speak of. By day, you lived as a quiet old woman, wrinkled hands, hunched back, but sweeping the yard neatly, boiling greens evenly, stacking firewood silently. But at night, when wind slipped through the thatch, when you laid your head on a worn pillow, when moonlight glowed faintly through the door crack, that smell returned. Not ash, not charred flesh, but the smell of powder over rotting skin, incense mixed with oozing sores, smell of power steeped in flesh until neither could be distinguished. The smell of Anne. In dreams, you saw her enter the room, as before, dress sweeping the floor, voice light as mist. You heard her ask, "Have you prepared the herbs for my dress today?" And you, even asleep, reached for the sachet. Your hands, in dreams, still knew exactly where each dress layer folded, each seam to slip through. Even awake, your hands curled, aching as if you'd just served a ritual no one demanded. Some days, you woke with the smell of pus around your nose, though no one in your room was ill. Some nights, you saw yourself holding the gold-embroidered silk cloth you'd burned with the ash box. You washed your hands hundreds of times, soaked them in jasmine water, burned fragrant grass, but the smell stayed, as if your paws were the last winter refuge of a fallen dynasty. Neighbors once said, "She's clean, but her house always smells strange." Not like old age, not like medicine, like something very old, but not yet dead. You didn't explain. How could they understand? How could you tell them of the night you wiped tears from someone who knew her head would fall? How could you describe the smell when white powder mixed with real blood, or the moment your trembling hand applied scented oil to the temples of someone who wouldn't live past noon? No, those things couldn't be told. They lived in your skin, your hair, your wordless memory, like a silent spell. Years later, near death, a young monk cared for you. He sat by your bed, asked, "Are you afraid to die?" You smiled, toothless, and whispered, "I've lived so close to death. It's more familiar than myself." He laughed, thinking you spoke in riddles. But that night, sleeping in a chair by your bed, he dreamed of a room reeking of powder and incense, a woman with cracked skin at a mirror, and a servant crying while still smoothing powder on her cheeks. The next morning, he didn't dare ask more. You died quietly. No drums. No one knew your real name. In your old cloth bag, they found a gold-embroidered handkerchief, singed at one corner, a dried herb sachet like ash, and a paper with no writing. But its smell made the opener cough and vomit. You were buried without a headstone, as you wished. But in the dreams of those living nearby, a dimly lit room with a strange smell kept appearing, as if part of Anne Boleyn refused to die, living through you, through smell, through memory, through powder layers. No one wiped away, and you'd known for long. Some things, once smelled, never leave you, not because they're strong, but because you lived close enough to become more than human. You didn't escape the palace. You only left its place. The true prison was the smell living in you like an undying parasite. The smell of power, of Anne, of eternal decay. The story of Anne Boleyn's last chambermaid, who lived beside a queen rotting layer by layer, yet forced to maintain a perfect facade, is not just a feudal tragedy, but a piercing metaphor for modern society, especially in American culture, where appearances, personal image, and iconic power reign supreme. In this story, Anne allowed no one to see her true face, refused to hear the truth of her decaying body, and even until her beheading, demanded perfect makeup. The maid, representing the backstage individuals in modern society, was forced to stay silent, endure, conceal, and even dissolve herself to serve an image no longer real. The lesson here is maintaining a perfect facade while crumbling inside isn't strength, it's erosion. In today's America, where social media lets people live through edited images, where success is measured by likes, this story reminds us that if you don't face your true smell, real wounds, real cracks, real weakness, you're burying yourself in the powder you apply. And if you're the servant serving another's image, beware. Staying too close to power doesn't just silence your voice, it can strip your ability to feel what's real. Protect yourself, keep your nose, before you lose your soul. If this story chilled you, but held your gaze, hit subscribe to join us in exploring history's darkest, most dazzling corners. Thank you for staying. See you in the next story, where beauty, power, and decay collide again.